Okay, members, you're very welcome. We're going to proceed in open session. We have a number of substantive items of business today, including subordinate legislation, briefing from the Northern Ireland Environment Link and the Landscape Institute with regard to the inquiry into building a united community, a briefing from Common Platform on the consultation on the draft racial equality strategy, and a briefing from the Department on initial outcomes of the consultation on the draft equality strategy. Okay, apologies then, members have been received from Michael Copeland, Bronwyn McGahan, Mike Nesbitt and Jimmy Spratt has advised that he may be late. Are there any other apologies? Okay, agenda item 2 then, Chairperson's business. At page 5 you will see correspondence from the new Commissioner for Children and Young People, Kula Yusuma, welcoming an introductory meeting with the committee. Members, you'll be aware that the Children's Commissioner is scheduled to give evidence to the committee on the Children's Services Cooperation Bill on the 15th of April. So can I suggest that we keep that briefing focused on the bill and that we invite the Commissioner to brief the committee at the earliest opportunity on wider issues relating to children and young people, and to request that the committee be provided with an early indication of that agenda. Would members be content with that approach? Agreed. Thank you. Okay then, committee invitation. Members, a copy of the current invitations is at page 6 of your pack. And do we need to speak to any of those in particular? No? Members happy to note those invitations? Agreed. Okay, thank you. Agenda item 3, members, the draft minutes of the meeting of the 11th of March are available at page 8 of your meeting packs. Are members content to agree the draft minutes? Agreed. Thank you. Okay, item 4 is in relation to the Children's Services Cooperation Bill. Members, at page 15 you'll see an updated list of written submissions received in relation to the committee stage of the Children's Services Cooperation Bill. Committee staff will bring a plan for gathering oral evidence to our next meeting for consideration, and can I remind members to notify the committee office of any particular organisations they wish to invite to give oral evidence to the bill. The next item then is the report on Assembly Committee priorities for European scrutiny in 2015. At our meeting last week, the committee agreed its report on Assembly Committee priorities for European scrutiny in 2015 and the wording of a take-note debate on the report. The Committee for the Environment reconsidered its priorities at its meeting on the 12th of March and has agreed to forward a revised submission for inclusion in the report. You'll find a clerk's cover note explaining the situation at page 18 and the revised submission from the Committee for the Environment at page 19. Members, can I suggest that we amend our report to reflect the revised priorities from the Environment Committee and replace the Committee for the Environment submission at Appendix 2 to the report with the revised submission. Members, are you content for the relevant extract from today's minutes to also be included in the report? Great. Content with that approach? Thank you. Okay, the revised report then will be led in the Business Office, and it is expected that the plenary debate will be scheduled for shortly after the Easter recess. There's also a list of outstanding correspondence at page 26 of your packs. Do members have any comments? Okay. Content? Okay then, agenda item 5, correspondence. Can I refer you to the correspondence summary sheet at page 29? This details the correspondence received since our last meeting, and in particular with regard to Street Games UK. At page 33 you will see a response from the department following our request that consideration be given to the concept of street games in the design of summer camps for 2015. Are members content to forward the response received to Mr Donnelly for information and to include the correspondence in our inquiry papers? Agreed? Okay, thanks. Do members wish to make any further comment on any other correspondence received? Content? Okay. Agenda item 6 then, members. At our meeting of the 11th of February, we considered a policy proposal to replace and replicate the existing regulations governing appeal fee structures with regards to the Planning Appeals Commission. The clerk's brief is in your pack at page 39. A cover letter from the department at page 42, and the statutory rule and explanatory memorandum begin at page 43. The examiner of statutory rules has not yet reported, but it is not expected that any issues are going to be raised. Do members have any objections to the rule? Are they content for me to read the following into the record? Content. Okay. I must now read the following into the record. Excuse me. That the Committee for the Office of the First Minister and Deputy First Minister has considered Statutory Rule SR 136-2015, the planning fees deemed planning applications and appeals regulations 2015, and subject to the report from the Examiner of Statutory Rules has no objection to the rule. Great. Okay then, agenda item 7 is in relation to the Planning Appeals Commission decision on appeals and making of reports amendment rules NI 2015. At our meeting on the 11th of February, we considered a policy proposal which amends the Planning Appeals Commission decision on appeals and making reports number 2, 2006, which currently prescribes the rules governing the procedure of the Commission and provides clarification to a number of terms. The clerk's brief is in your pack at page 52, a cover letter from the department at page 55, and the statutory rule and explanatory memorandum begin at page 56. The examiner of statutory rules has not yet reported, but isn't expected to raise any issues. Do members have any objections to the rule, or may I read the following into the record? Content? Okay. That the Committee for the Office of the First Minister and Deputy First Minister has considered Statutory Rule SR 137-2015, the Planning Appeals Commission decision on appeals and making of reports amendment rules NI 2015, and subject to the report from the Examiner of Statutory Rules has no objection to the rule. Okay, one more. Bear with me, members, fairly technical set of agenda items here. Agenda item 8, SR 144-2015. At our meeting on the 4th of March, we considered a policy proposal to amend Article 73 of the Fair Employment and Treatment Northern Ireland Order 1998 to enable compliance with the European Council Directive that establishes a general framework for equal treatment in employment, occupation on the grounds of disability, sexual orientation, religion and belief, and age. The clerk's brief is in your packet, page 61, a cover letter from the department at page 64, and the statutory rule and explanatory memorandum at page 65. Examiner of statutory rules has not yet reported, but is not expected to raise issues. Or do members have any concerns or content for me to read the following into the record? Content. Read the record, okay. That the Committee for the Office of the First Minister and Deputy First Minister has considered Statutory Rule SR 144-2015, the Fair Employment and Treatment Order Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2015, and subject to the report from the Examiner of Statutory Rules has no objection to the rule. One more. Agenda item 9, the Sex Discrimination Order 1976 Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2015. At our meeting on the 4th of March, we considered a policy proposal to amend Article 36(1)(b) of the Sex Discrimination Northern Ireland Order 1976, which seeks to address concerns raised by the European Commission regarding the transposition of the Gender Directive, which implements the principle of equal treatment between men and women in the access to and supply of goods and services. Clerk's brief is at page 71. Cover letter, page 74, statutory rule and explanatory memorandum at page 75. No report from Examiner of Statutory Rules yet, but no expected issues to be raised. Are members content that I read the following into the record? Thank you. That the Committee for the Office of the First Minister and Deputy First Minister has considered Statutory Rule SR 144 2015, the Sex Discrimination Order 1976 Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2015, and subject to the report from the Examiner of Statutory Rules, has no objection to the rule. Okay. Statutory rules finished. Thanks for bearing with me, members. Agenda item 10 then is our draft forward work programme. Just in case we run out of time later on, are you content that we take the draft forward work programme now? You'll find it at page 214 of your meeting packs. You'll see that next week we're due to receive our regular programme for government updates and an update on the 2015-16 budget position for OFM DFM. As it stands, members, officials are scheduled to give those briefings, but I wanted to propose that we would at the least invite the ministers to give them an option to attend in briefing on what are two key areas in relation to programme for government updates and indeed the 2015-16 budget position. Would members be content to support inviting the ministers as well? Okay, agreed. Yep, okay, thanks. And following Easter recess then, our main focus of work will be continued scrutiny of the Children's Services Cooperation Bill and finalising our inquiry into building a united community. Are members content with the proposed forward work programme or any amendments? Content?
So is that all? I see the list that's there. Is that all the groups who put submissions in? Is there any groups that participating?
That we had sought to engage with? Karen, do you want to give us an update?
The information that's in Matters Horizon is the list of those who have responded to the call for written evidence. And staff are going to put together a paper for members to consider next week in terms of inviting groups up for oral evidence. So if there's groups that you feel are missing or ones that you would like to see included, then let us know, and we'll throw them into the mix as well.
Okay, thank you for that.
Happy enough, yep.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Okay, members content to agree that forward work programme then?
Chair, can I just ask one question in relation to the forward work programme? Have we any indication when the departmental briefing will be on the HIA scope?
No.
Not at the moment, but we can raise that with officials and
okay.
try and get an answer.
It would be better if we had that sooner rather than later, given the way things are going. Okay.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah, sure.
Do you want to write to the department officially? Or do you have
Members content for us to write to the department to seek an update in relation to that matter? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, members, that's the forward work programme. Agenda item 11 then is our briefing from the Northern Ireland Environment Link and Landscape Institute in relation to our inquiry into building a united community with a focus on the issues of shared space. Members will recall that we began this briefing at our meeting on the 11th of February, but due to exceptional plenary business, which included a number of divisions, we were forced to reschedule. A cover note from the clerk is available at page 82 in your packs, and the submission from the Northern Ireland Environment Link is at page 84, with the submission from the Landscape Institute at page 90. I'm delighted that we're able to welcome back to our committee today Dr. Stephen McCabe, the Policy and Projects Officer from Northern Ireland Environment Link, and Mr. Pete Mullen, Policy Representative from the Landscape Institute. Stephen and Pete, thank you very much indeed for making yourselves available today for our meeting, and I'd invite you to make short opening remarks before opening up for questions for the committee, if you're content.
Sure.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chair, for your welcome, and to the committee for inviting us back again to provide some evidence to the inquiry. I'll go over the ground that I covered last time. The Northern Ireland Environment Link is the networking and forum body for non-statutory organisations concerned with the environment in Northern Ireland. Members represent a significant constituency within Northern Ireland and manage a large land area, delivering a variety of benefits to society. Members are involved in environmental issues of all types and at all levels, from the local community to the global environment. And Environment Link brings together a range of knowledge, experience, expertise that can be used to develop policy and practice in environmental issues. With regard to the implementation of the Building a United Community strategy. I guess a simple but key point that we want to get across to you today is that there's a significant body of research that exists that demonstrates that the environment is a key factor in building community cohesion. While there is no individual person or single organisation or discipline that has all the answers to complex social issues and problems, part of the solution to overcoming divided communities will be found in addressing environmental improvement. Well-designed, well-maintained shared green space in urban areas has been shown to reduce crime and antisocial behaviour, contributing to the establishment of more stable societies. As people feel more comfortable, perhaps more pride in where they live, their confidence increases, they feel less threatened, and furthermore, better integration of land and transport planning naturally leads to better functioning places, and better functioning places means greater social inclusion. One term that we want to raise today is that of green infrastructure, and green infrastructure essentially means using green and blue space, vegetation and water to address social, environmental and economic issues. We would suggest that shared natural space, green infrastructure and recognition of the services that flow to society from the environment, which are really true public goods, that those things should be embedded in all public policy. And there are great opportunities to do that through the Regional Development Strategy, through the Strategic Planning Policy Statement for Northern Ireland, and through the implementation of the very good ideas that exist in the Urban Stewardship and Design Guide, Living Places. Research shows that shared space is more likely to be used if it's natural in character. Our natural and historic heritage has a massive, potentially massive role to play in delivering TBUC. Shared spaces aren't just urban, and we would encourage communities to explore our shared spaces outside urban areas. Beautiful shared spaces and shared built heritage that we have in Northern Ireland, places like the Belfast Hills, Mourne Mountains, our great beaches, the rich heritage of the Causeway coastline, just to name a few examples. Those are all part of our shared heritage and should really be promoted as shared space. The heritage perspective then, I think, has a large role to play in overcoming division and giving a fresh perspective to the present. Finally, from me, Environment Link have been involved over the past few years in the administration of the NIEA Challenge Fund. The Challenge Fund is just one example, and I gave out books the last time we were here covering Challenge Fund projects. It's just one example of how environmental projects can deliver much more than just environmental outcomes. They can deliver community benefits, including increased cohesion and cross-community, addressing cross-community issues, seen, for example, in the early stages of the Suffolk Interface Pocket Plots project. Another example of environmental management delivering shared space for communities is Ulster Wildlife's Bog Meadows Reserve in West Belfast, which sees in excess of 40,000 visitors a year from across communities. And there is potential for much more multiple benefit work like that in Northern Ireland. And I'll just pass over to Pete now.
Thank you. Afternoon. Pete Mullen, Chartered Landscape Architect, Policy Consultant for the Landscape Institute in Northern Ireland. Firstly, thanks to the committee for having us back again. We'll try and keep this quite short. Stephen's already covered most of the key points that I'd like to cover as well today, and I'd simply concur and support the points that he's made. In short, there's a growing body of evidence supporting, I guess, what we all instinctively know, that quality environments have a direct and positive impact on people's quality of life. This doesn't simply mean provision of well-finished accommodation, for example, will tick all the boxes. As you know, it's much more complex, it's much more multi-layered, so there's no single fixed solution to this. Over the past sort of 4 or 5 years, Landscape Institute centrally have been very active in developing and advocating some of the core principles of our profession. These have resulted in a number of position papers, which I've already issued a couple to the committee. includes climate change, green infrastructure, housing, water, and most recently public health and well-being. And there are a number of threads that run through all of these papers, which is really, I suppose, focused on the fact that good design of the environment delivers multifunctional, tangible and sometimes intangible benefit. Probably familiar with the Barton Grant Settlement Health Map. Again, I'll just refer you, when you get opportunity, to have a look at the position paper, Public Health in the Landscape. And it's a simple, colourful diagram which places people at the centre of our settlement and concentric rings that run out that also include the built environment and the natural environment. And all of these things influence people's well-being and health. And that, studies have shown that that is increasingly demonstrable. Accommodating change is at the heart of our interest as professions, and it's what we do. It's what we expect. We expect change to take place in our environments. It's something that we work with. We sometimes call it material, if you like, is working with time as a fourth dimension. Sounds very mysterious, but it's simply understanding the process of a constantly changing environment. But that doesn't mean that change should just be allowed to have free rein and you just leave it to the open forces. So we need to be able to identify what is worthwhile protecting, what is worthwhile managing, what maybe could be better, and work with that. So we need to manage expectations. We need to manage and guide change going forward. That's the foundation of our planning system. Planning is a result of, I suppose, allowing market forces to direct the results. We believe TBUC, Together Building a United Community, offers great opportunities, great potential to support the delivery of better placemaking and stewardship, which will in turn lead to more sustainable communities. As you'll be aware, our organisation held a lunchtime conference last month here in the Long Gallery, kindly supported by the committee. This was very successful and the feedback has been very positive to date. And for those who couldn't make it, we have recorded the speakers. That will be put up on a website. But in short, we had 3 speakers. Sylvia Gordon was Chief Executive of Groundworks. She described how her organisation is working at interface areas with communities to deliver shared space and improve community relations in North Belfast and other parts of Belfast. We had Dr. Milena Komarova, an academic from the Study of Conflict Transformation and Social Justice at Queen's. And she gave some very useful and insightful approaches in terms of their research. One of the key messages that struck me is that all parts of our cities and urban spaces are exposed to conflict. There's conflict and there's contested interest of all kinds in those spaces. Where we are in Northern Ireland is that we also have this layer of sort of ethno-nationally divided city to deal with as well. So we have this other elephant in the room, for want of a better description, that we must start to embed into our policies and approaches to delivery of shared spaces. We also had a speaker called Neil Porter from Gustafson Porter. They've done a lot of work in Beirut where they have had to deal with master planning a city that has been exposed to complex conflict and sectarian divide. Simple message that came out of that, one journalist captured it very well. Building relationships matter in urban planning. And I'll just finish with a paragraph. In this context, it's simple to focus on the relationship between local communities. That's key, but there's a myriad of other relationships that need to be built as well. We need to improve the structures and resources around funding and procurement, departmental siloisation and any blockages that can result in dampening aspirations for our public space. And we've made some grounds to that. The DOE produced the Living Places document, which you'd be familiar with, some of you, the Urban Stewardship and Design Guide. Some very good key messages coming out of that document. It now needs to take on a new life and start to be built into our policy. But incidentally, it doesn't mention TBUC. It doesn't mention this issue that TBUC is trying to address. So it's important that that is somehow built into the policies going forward. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, gentlemen. I find it very persuasive indeed, the points that you're putting forward in terms of the important to natural and built environment in terms of shaping the type of society, united society that we want to see in Northern Ireland. You prompted my first question with reference to DOE Living Places not making much explicit reference to the Building United Community Strategy. So how, of all the extremely important points that you raise, how well reflected are they in the current Building United Community Strategy?
The Living Places does make mention, there's a number of key points that it talks about. I mean, it talks about, there's a section called Bringing It Together, which I think is getting close to what the theme of this inquiry is about. And it has a number of key points. One is really looking at the challenges, and I think they do have a very, just flash a picture up from that section of one of the peace walls that seemed clearly to be one of the challenges, but it doesn't go into any great detail as to how we deal with those challenges. From a practical point of view, and I've seen it in my own professional practice, there's a great deal of positive approaches. When we're dealing with projects through DSD, communities, through DOE, professionals are very keen, and even the communities are very keen to deliver in terms of creating shared space and good quality shared space. But there are blockages to that. Living Places is a very nice starting point. It's a good guidance document. Sort of sets the high level where we ought to be achieving. But it then doesn't get into the sort of technical side of things, and that's where it sort of falls down at this point in time. And I think it needs to be maybe Living Places 2, some kind of technical support to that. How do we then deliver? So if this is the aspiration, now I need to think about how we deliver that.
Building United Community is similar in a way as well, because it lists that the statement that all public space should be shared space, but I'm not too sure how much detail it goes into as to how that's going to be delivered. I'm certainly don't recall any great reference to the level of detail that you've managed to outline even in a short presentation today, so hopefully these will be important points for us to work into the issues that we'll document further to the inquiry. Can I ask one other question before bringing in the members? You make some reference to projects such as the Connswater Community Greenway, for example, in my own constituency in East Belfast. Are there learning points that can be drawn from that type of project for other projects in other areas of Northern Ireland?
Say some words.
Absolutely, I think so. It's very difficult to take something as good as the Connswater Community Greenway and just drop it in other places, but I think there are definitely lessons that we can learn there on the multiple benefits of having a space like that, not only for shared communities, but in terms of transport, active travel, flood alleviation. It ticks so many boxes across different policy areas, and also in the way that it was funded, with input from lots of different departments and bodies. I think it's a good example for us going forward.
I mean, it's a good example. I think probably its criticism, if there is a criticism, is that it responds to natural systems. It responds to the Connswater, which is where it comes from. So it comes from the Castlereagh Hills down to the foreshore. That is happenstance. That's where it is. So it doesn't strictly pass through an interface area, for example. It's very much an East Belfast-based project. I think there's sort of some leverage towards the short strand, but not really anything physically connected. So it would be interesting as a learning exercise to try and apply the same principles of a green corridor, what we call a piece of green infrastructure, through a series of more difficult or more challenging interface areas. You know, Alexander Park was one that was discussed during our conference last month, and the potential. It is also attached to a small water course which is called the Mile River that runs from Belfast Hill right down through several difficult interfaces right down to the foreshore again. Very disconnect physically, very disconnect psychologically. So it would be very interesting to see if some kind of a project could be applied on that basis, see what the real results might be.
Okay, let me bring David McElveen in.
Thanks very much, Chair. And I suppose this is kind of following on the same kind of theme. The department have been very enthusiastic about the concept of urban villages, and there's been urban villages tied in with this strategy. Yet I noticed there wasn't a specific mention of that concept within the submissions that we received from. So I'd be just curious to know if that was just an oversight, or if you have a particular opinion on urban villages. Maybe to hear what.
Well, to be honest, I mean, at the time of writing our submission, I wasn't tuned into the Urban Village Initiative. Having said that, I'm still not entirely tuned into the Urban Village Initiative in terms of what it's. I know that there are high-level, sort of high-level brief attached to that, but I'm not personally familiar with the detail of what encaptures an urban village. Is it bound by lines? Is it focused on a single point, radiating out what defines urban village? So I would be very keen, and I've been sort of making inquiries just actually in the last couple of days to DSD about urban villages, just to, I suppose, understand myself as to where the gaps may be in terms of what it's trying to achieve. So in principle, yes, I think the urban villages has the potential to do what we want it to do, which is to reposition areas, but we would need to see that then isn't inward looking. It needs to be an outward looking approach.
And thank you very much for that, and I'm sure the department will not be found wanting in trying to clarify that for you. This came out of we had a regional meeting last week in my own constituency in Northampton, and we had a fairly long drawn-out conversation around that kind of point where putting people together crosses the line of social engineering. And I just wonder, from your point of view, looking at it from the environmental side, is there a sort of a no see that to cross over actually? Last week of Unity Flats, for example, in Belfast, which obviously was built with the best of it. Achieve what it was supposed to achieve. So, you know, where there are examples of bad practice in this regard, where from your point of view would be the sort of line not to cross?
Well, there's been a lot of good study done in terms of, again, involving grassroots communities, but also, again, and you'll be aware, involving children's groups and through education is always a very positive way to make a change. I think this comes back into the idea of what I mentioned earlier about time. There's no quick fixed solution to any of this, and it will have to be something that we'll have to grind out over a long period of time. But unless you put the seed in place, unless you bring, for example, these communities or willing communities together, you're always going to have there will continue to be blockages. I think it would probably be all of our benefit if we were to identify ways to bring those communities together. We can't lead the horse to the water, so to speak, but we can't make the horse drink, but we can lead it to the water. So we have to identify opportunities where we can get cross-community involvement, whether that be a lot of good work done by Belfast Healthy Cities in terms of creating allotments, places for children to get involved in the environment and working through in that nature.
I would just agree with Pete that, you know, the physical environment and creating good spaces and places is sort of where we're coming from. I appreciate that there are other layers of complexity on top of that, absolutely. But I would also just endorse what Pete said about environmental education. I think that's a key area of potential for crossing communities and getting school kids doing things together in the environment.
I mean, there's an initiative in the rest of the UK called Learning from Landscapes, and it's within England, Scotland and Wales. We don't have it here. And it's a very positive, it starts in the schools, and they do a lot of outdoor work with kids and learning from their environment. We do have some good work going on, but we maybe need to be more structured and organised about that.
I would just add one more thing to that we've now reached 100% eco schools in Northern Ireland. There's a great existing network there that we can tap into in terms of these issues.
And then maybe just very finally, through Mr. Chairman, just to you, Stephen, because I think this will be a fairly short answer. I mean, you'd made mention to the issues of sort of open space, shared open space that we have, and obviously I'm particularly blessed with something where we've obviously a lot of open space, which is certainly very much viewed upon as being open to everybody, and there are no signs, no emblems, no nothing. You go there and it's just purely open, and the natural beauty is there. But particularly around Belfast in recent months, some of the open space around Belfast, I think at one site in particular, and I'd say it will probably be known to you, has been used, I think, for the promotion of messages which at times have been quite sectarian. Presumably that type of abuse of the landscape would be something that, from your point of view, you would discourage.
I would say, one of the great things about the environment is that it is for everyone equally. That would be my position on it.
Yeah, I think that applies to all spaces, whether they're a large open space or even a small urban space. There needs to be a movement towards, if you like, less branding of space and a repositioning of those areas.
Thank you very much.
Yes, a couple of other members to bring in, but where do murals fit in to the consideration of these issues?
I mean, it's clearly at the heart of a lot of the problems, and there's currently a big, a thorny debate ongoing on that. Generally, as designers, when we're brought in, I was talking to Stephen about this outside, we get very good at negotiating with people and talking about repositioning a new space. So where an opportunity arises for a piece of streetscape or urban design, you very much design with humans in mind, as opposed to any particular political attitude. So you design it to create a nice space, a nice environment. And I think I'd be very surprised if there's any sort of professional designers who didn't take that approach to it. The difficulty is what happens afterwards. And I have a personal experience of working on a number of schemes where we did the handover, and next thing, flags went up when the communities moved in. So that's unhelpful, because then that very much sets out the use for that. If you like, the division becomes very prevalent there. So I think there has to be a sea change in how we steward things going forward. We were in the habit of investing money in the creation of a space and then putting aside maybe a small budget for maintenance of that, but not really. Ownership finishes at that point. And I think that is where this idea of stewardship that's in the title of that document, Living Places, comes in. That has to be ongoing and repeated and repeated. You can't just sort of walk away from it and leave it. It has to be.
Brenda Hale.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. You mentioned that the Landscape Institute is actually making its 50th year as a profession, marking it, so congratulations. But in that time there's been a demise in your public sector membership. Why do you think that is? And also, have you made any representations to the shadow councils? And I speak specifically of Lisburn Castlereagh, to inform them of your work. And Chair, if I can just put in a record this time, the impressive renovation of Castle Gardens in Lisburn, and as Stephen said earlier, it does indeed raise the historical and heritage environment of the city, and I think everybody's bought into that again. And I suppose the stewardship as well. There hasn't been any flags. I mean, the whole city has taken ownership of the gardens, but just, I suppose, Lisburn Castlereagh, the new councillors are coming in next month. Have you made representation to them about the work that you do?
I mean, professionally, we have been a bit. Landscape Institute has been very much sort of. We like to hide it under a bushel. We haven't been very good at promoting the work that we do. As you say, 50 years this year. That coincides actually with the 50th year celebration of Craigavon as a new town, when the first professionals came in to Northern Ireland to help to deliver that project, and the institute was set up. And that was an all-Ireland institute that was there to be the only landscape architects within the whole of Ireland, and that has been something we've sort of we tend to not promote the work that we do the way we maybe ought to. And in the last couple of years, we've been trying to change that. Part of the work that I've been doing, and I was taking on as secretariat just in the last year for the institute as their policy consultant. So that's now a small paying role to put a wee bit more concerted effort into promotion and advocacy of what we do. We have a plan to approach the 11 new councils to try and build up our presence within that. It's about capacity building. You're quite right. I did a statistic recently. I think in Scotland, something like 50% of the local authorities in Scotland have a landscape architect. I think 90% have access to one to help to inform brief, to help to develop development plans and policy. In Northern Ireland, 7%. Currently, that'll probably change whenever we turn to 11 councils as opposed to 26. But essentially, at the moment, Belfast is the only local authority that has a landscape architect working within it. I think Derry maybe has one as well, actually. But the rest of the country has not felt the need for landscape professionals. And I think the simple reason is that I think there's a perception that only Belfast and Derry have parks, and therefore it's only them that need to have landscape professionals. But the reality of modern life and modern environment is that there are pressure from wind turbines, there are pressure from infrastructure, there's some pressure from economic regeneration, and all of these councils, all of you will feel the effect of that. So you need to have people there that are professionally equipped to help you inform policy going forward. So yes, we're doing work on it. We could do better, but we're
Thank you, Chair. I hope to maybe get some input into transforming the Lagan Canal that runs through Lisburn as well. So I look forward to seeing your fingerprints over that work.
Absolutely. Can I just say on sort of behalf of the wider sector, we have been engaging or will be engaging with councillors around their new planning powers, and we're producing a planning handbook, if you like, with Sustainable Northern Ireland that really tries to raise the awareness of environment and heritage assets in each council area, and we'll be distributing that through NILGA.
Okay, Alec Maskey.
Thank you, Chair. Get these questions right, I'm going to swap seats with you. I mean, these are very difficult issues, and obviously for the purposes of the committee's inquiry in this, we're trying to work out who can help and what additional can people bring to the table. And actually, that's your last question. You want to discuss with us how your own profession and how Landscape Institute can help in terms of bringing communities together. And I can understand the issues around. I mean, you've addressed a number of and Brenda's raised it there, about the capacity around local government and maybe the deficit, as you see it, of your profession involved in the planning stages. So I can actually understand structurally how we can, perhaps if it was thought necessary, increase the number of your members in the various institutions. I can understand clearly the need to have a landscape strategy which would underpin certainly strategic planning and design issues. So I can understand the need to get something in the curriculum and education. So I can picture all that and say, well, there's a gap, see if we can fill that. But when you then talk about interfaces or the Bog Meadows or Custom House Square or a range of the other initiatives which have been identified, all of which are very good in their own way and have been very successful in their own way, but how do we add value to that? Because in most of the interface areas that you'll know, and you've addressed some of them, you couldn't. It wouldn't matter if you were putting palm trees in. People need the interface there under the current circumstances they feel they have to live within. So the last thing a lot of those communities want is to take that wall down. That's a sad reflection of the life that we live. Unfortunately, for a lot of people, if you go into their houses and you look out at a wall, they'd actually rather have that because it feels safer in their home. It's a shocking indictment on all of us. But what we're trying to work out, how do we, in the context of your presentation, how do we bring what you have to offer, which is around your kind of higher vision around the use of space? How do you introduce that into a conversation with people who are living fearful of where they're living and don't want to have anything done to that wall that's there, if you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because you can't ignore the other. You can put, I mean, you have already identified a lot of the niches where parks have been done, niches have been taken, and that's all very, very good. But how do we reach the places where we really do need to try to make a difference in people's quality of lives, if you know what I mean, by bringing them together? Because I said it wouldn't matter what you do with some of those walls, that people want them there. We're trying to set ourselves a target of removing them. But when you go and talk to people who live there, they'd rather have that than they feel the insecurity of having it taken away. So what other challenges or what other conversation might you have with those communities? Because you've addressed the point yourself where you've been involved in initiatives and you go and you negotiate with the community and you get murals down, and then when you do the bit of work, you back up again. So that's only really managing a situation. I'm not saying you're wrong to do that, because we all ultimately do that at times. So I'm just trying to work out what else can your profession bring other than good design, high quality design, landscape, the high level vision, which is all very important. How do we marry that with the need to get people to feel more comfortable where they live? If you know what I mean. That's a tough question, I know that.
Very tough
I expect you
question.
to have the answer, but I wouldn't expect you to take away and think about it.
Well, I mean, there's clearly no easy solution to that. I mean, we have members who are involved at a number of levels, and the conference was quite interesting that we had last month, because we had, if you like, 3 tiers to that, and I was involved in setting the thing up and deliberately chose 3 speakers that would cover the academic area or the overview of dealing with cities of conflict. We also had a master planner, somebody who dealt with how do you deal with on a bigger scale, looking for connectivity and solutions on a if you like, a planning or an urban design scale. But we had Sylvia from Groundworks, again dealing with on the ground, and it's one of these situations where it may well simply be, it isn't one or it's all of those things that have to kind of come together. And I think we're unfortunately going to be in a case of small gains on this one. I don't think there's going to be an overnight ability for us just to come along, disappear a wall in the middle of the night. It's going to have to take time to kind of look for ways of creating breaks and apertures and almost erode the peace wall as opposed to removing of it. So we may have to look at ways that we start to take it down a bit, narrow it a bit, shorten it, and gradually get people confident that that's okay. So there will be a process, I think, and it's not going to be a quick win. It'll be a slow one. That would be my own thought. But when the walls eventually would come down, we also have to think about what is beyond that. What is it that you're revealing? There are some examples in the city where the antisocial, if you want to call it antisocial, sectarian, antisocial behaviour, both are very similar when you see them expressed. But there are communities now that have been rebuilt. So I'm thinking, for example, and I mentioned this before, beside Clonard, back of Clonard, there's a new piece of social housing there. Very much on the back of the interface wall. When you look with the benefit of Google Earth nowadays, you can kind of flick from one side of the street to the other. You realise that there's it's just more housing, and it's trying to educate people towards and children towards the fact that what's over that wall is a perception issue that they currently have. There's something big and scary beyond that large wall that they shouldn't have contact with. And the reality of that is it's just another street. So I think there's a whole slow process of trying to bring people backwards and forwards from that point. I don't know.
Oh, no, I appreciate that.
One of the young people at a recent event of ours asked whether walls could be see-through, which I'd never heard anybody ask before, and I'm not sure it's as immediately dismissible as you might otherwise think. Maybe you could have as the landscape architect professional experts for us, you can have a think about that.
Could increase the sales of perspex.
If gradual revelation that the other side of the similarities rather than the differences, maybe.
Well, one small
might be
project that
something to
we're
that.
working on at the moment, I've secured a piece of the Berlin Wall for Northern Ireland. I contacted the Senate in Berlin about, they were celebrating, during the process of pulling this response together and the conference, Berlin were celebrating 25 years of since the wall came down. And it occurred to me there was a map, I think it was in The Guardian, that had pieces of this wall everywhere from Christchurch in New Zealand through to Canada, but there's none in Ireland. And I thought, oh, hold on a minute, there's an opportunity here to take something. Now, obviously, politically, the reasoning behind the walls are very different, but the idea of division is the same, and what we can do with that, possibly, there might be a number of little spin-out projects that we can use that piece of wall to identify the if you like, to shine a light on the problem. And I think all those little things can help.
Alex Atwood?
Well, the first thing is that could I agree with an earlier point that you made, that the scale, that there has to be some opportunities for better understanding of that unity when we all appreciate the scale of our built, natural, archaeological and Christian heritage, which is in the common ownership of all our people. And there must be some learning and narrative around all of that in order to, open our minds from beyond the more orthodox. And I think you indicate that earlier. So I think part of TBUC shouldn't be just to manage the visible expressions of division. It must also have a narrative about what is actually our shared heritage and the wonder of it, and celebrate it and draw conclusions from that. And I think TBUC, which we think is quite a moderate start anyway, lacks that sense of grounding the united community in that which is already there that unites us, but we don't seem to acknowledge in the way that we should. I do think Alex Maskey is right to ask you the question when it comes to the hard end of building a community, how your institute and your experience can inform that. And part of it is that it is only when you're on the ground, you working with the communities, that people can begin to see other ways how a wall might look. Although the point is still valid at the far end of all of that, unless you've got the confidence on either side, it doesn't go anywhere, and rightly so, because you cannot, when people have worst fears, say it'll be okay on the night, sort of thing. That just is not credible. So I do think, so my question one is are you involved in any of that work with OFM, DFM around the walls in order to try to look at options and the way it can look or feel different? Because we probably have to feel different before it looks different, or before it is different, before it all is taken down.
Personally, I'm not involved in those projects. I know that some of our members will have involvement through some of the DSD projects that are in streetscape improvements. I know that they're involved in various parts of North Belfast and East Belfast. So we do have private practitioners involved in lots of these procured initiatives and master plan initiatives. We could probably benefit with, just as was mentioned earlier by Brenda, that with, if you like, some more members who are involved in brief setting, who are involved internally within City Council who can then deliver some of these strategies through, you know, the new development plans which will be coming forward and the local policies that will be coming forward. So yes, we have people involved, if you like, in the once it has been recognised that there is a project needed, but it would be more helpful if we have people who are involved in helping to set those projects and identify the potential.
Okay. Okay, thanks very much indeed. Gentlemen, I've found it very useful indeed, and we'll factor all this into the issues paper that we produce, and I might propose to the committee as well that we perhaps write to the Department of Environment to ask how Urban Design Guide Living Places is going to link with the Together Building a United Community, and also perhaps for some more information with regards to how organisations would engage with the design process around urban villages. Are there any other last issues that you would like to raise of that nature?
Just chiming in a little bit on the heritage aspect, I know that NIEA are very shortly going to be releasing their historic environment strategy, and I think there's a lot of scope there for TBUC, and that those strategies should speak to one another.
Okay.
Can I just ask if there's any other information? Could you refer to other case studies and so on that you might have? But I don't see them here in this pack, so maybe available to us at some point if we could.
Yeah, we have there was a series of sort of papers that we would issue. We can recirculate anybody that didn't receive them from the last time. I think we need to find a mechanism to almost mark the success of TBUC as well going forward. There's a number of sustainability markers out there. So if for example, I'm trying to say this without creating another tier of bureaucracy, because the last thing anybody needs is another box to tick. But there are a number of mechanisms such as BREEAM, which is to do with creating sustainable design. BREEAM's applied to a lot of public sector projects, whether it be schools or hospitals or social housing. CEQUAL is another one, really more connected to civils work, streetscape work and town centre work. And I do wonder if there's a mechanism whereby, as part of the tender procurement process, we have to deliver the results in terms of economic benefit. So if you're designing a town centre improvement scheme, you have to then involve economists to determine what the net benefit for every pound spent. You'll get £3 return in terms of investment, etc. I do wonder if there's something within that mechanism that marks our success in terms of bringing communities together, things that we have done within a master plan process, which is maybe more outward looking at connections, looking at opportunities to avoid division physically, that type of exercise, which a designer will do as part of a good designer will do as part of their process. They just need to sort of set it out, and that will then give us a tangible way to mark the success of that programme.
Okay, thanks very much indeed, gentlemen. We've got a lot to go on there. Thank you for your contribution today, and we're hoping to produce a report of the inquiry towards the end of this session, so we'll be able to re-engage with you then.
Many thanks for having us
Thank you
along.
very much. Thank you.
Very much.
Okay, members, can I propose that we write to, would it be the Committee for Environment or the Department for the Environment, just to inquire as to how the Living Places Guide does connect with the Building United Community, and to Office of First and Deputy First Minister for an update as to an update on the design of urban villages and how organisations can engage with that process. Members content? Okay, thanks. Okay then, members. Agenda item 12 is our presentation from the Common Platform in relation to the draft racial equality strategy. First, we're going to hear from those representatives on concerns about the draft racial equality strategy, and then we'll receive a briefing from departmental officials on the initial outcomes of the consultation. Can I refer you to your packs? The Common Platform agreed response to the draft racial equality strategy is available at page 99. A briefing paper from the Northern Ireland Council for Ethnic Minorities is at page 105. The consultation on the draft racial equality strategy, page 113, and the consultation on the draft racial equality indicator review is at page 175. Members, in October we received a request from Peter Osborne, representing the Common Platform, for an opportunity to make a presentation to the committee in relation to the consultation on the draft racial equality strategy. The committee also received correspondence from the Northern Ireland Council for Ethnic Minorities requesting an opportunity to brief members on the same issue. The committee therefore agreed to invite a representative panel from Common Platform, which should include NICEM, to brief members on this issue. So I'm delighted that we're able to welcome to our meeting today Mr. Patrick Yu, the Director of NICEM, Ms. Cassia Garbel, Chair of the Common Platform, Dr. Mazar Khan, Trustee of the Belfast Islamic Centre, Mrs. Bernadette McAliskey, Coordinator of the South Tyrone Empowerment Partnership, and Mr. Ashok Sharma from the Indian Community Centre. We have a paper from the Common Platform and NICEM in our meeting papers today, and I'd invite the panel to make short opening remarks. We'll try and remain within about 10 minutes, folks, if you're able to divide that amongst yourselves. I realise we've got a hearty panel before us today, so I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this opportunity to brief the committee on the Common Platform. As the Chair stated, Common Platform is a response to the draft racial equality strategy, which was agreed by almost 80 organisations coming from all across different sectors, from statutory, voluntary community and employers as well. The Common Platform highlights agreed common themes and principles, and we believe that the strategy, the draft racial equality strategy, falls short of the expectations and aspirations of the civil society and minority ethnic sector in particular. We believe that especially the vision fails to acknowledge the important contribution that ethnic minority people make to the society here in Northern Ireland. We believe that the evidence is flawed, that key equalities are not identified and addressed. We've got concerns about governance arrangements, lack of actions, and a number of other issues. But in our evidence today, we wish to focus on the need to identify and prioritise the main inequalities. We are going to be talking to you also about coordination, accountability, and the need for allocation of resources. So now I will hand to Mr. Patrick Yu.
Thank you, Chair, and also the committee members. I will more specifically focus on the reform of the race relation law and also ethnic monitoring. The reform of the race relation law is not new. It was one of the key areas in the last racial equality strategy and need to be changed in order to promote racial equality in Northern Ireland. The default position is that in 2000, the UK government enacted a major amendment under the Race Relation Act 1976, which is our current law today. We agreed to wait for the change under the Single Equality Bill for Northern Ireland, but it was never materialized. Therefore, in 2009, the All-Party Group on Ethnic Minority Community sponsored a motion debate to reform the current race law, which was voted unanimously in favour by all Assembly members. But no action has been taken by the OFMDFM. We have been waiting patiently for the last 15 years. It is the time for action. Otherwise, ethnic minority continue to be a second-class citizen in Northern Ireland, which violate all international law. It is also not proportionate to the contribution of ethnic minority toward our society. Moreover, the current racial inequality and social exclusion is due to the current weakness of the law that based on the 70. Now we are 2015. We are 35 years in the outdated law we have now. To address the racial inequality and social exclusion in Northern Ireland is to strengthening the current race law. The Equality Commission have been put forward their suggestion similar to those in 2009 motion debate at the consultation document. We urge the committee to scrutinize the OFM-DFM to ensure that one of the action plan is to put forward the proposal that based on the Commission's one and also the timetable to reform the law. Another key area to promote racial equality is ethnic monitoring. Currently, no department has any monitoring data on ethnic minority in order to ascertain the level of take-up rate of the services that the department is provided. Under Section 25 of the Northern Ireland Act, it is their duty to promote equality, including racial equality. How they benchmark to promote equality if they are not even have any monitoring data to benchmark on race? The reform of the race law and also ethnic monitoring is a minimum package to promote racial equality. It is just like the two sides of the same coin, one without the other. The non-discrimination law is to set the standard of behavior in our society as law, and the ethnic monitoring assists public authority to promote racial equality in order to facilitate integration and sense of belonging of ethnic minority in Northern Ireland. I just finished here.
Now we wish to concentrate on some key inequalities, namely in employment, education and access to health. My role, I'm a co-chair of the platform, but I'm also working for the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, and I wish to point out some inequalities, some key inequalities in employment. Basically, employment problems have been identified by research to be the main barrier to integration of migrant and minority ethnic people here and elsewhere as well. Workplace is, as you are aware, the key point of contact with people from other backgrounds. With the experience of the workplace and the relationships minority ethnic people develop in the workplace are therefore crucial to successful integration. The issue of exploitation of migrant and minority ethnic workers needs to be addressed as a matter of urgency. BME workers are particularly vulnerable to exploitation and differential treatment for a number of reasons. And these reasons are concentration in low-paid, poorly regulated, non-unionized and generally precarious employment, a low awareness of employment rights, language barrier and difficulties in seeking legal redress, agency work. They're also vulnerable to harassment and bullying in the workplace. That comes from colleagues and management, but also clients and patients in the case of the health service. Also, immigration status makes them more vulnerable as well. This issue needs to be properly researched and an action plan created to address this widespread phenomenon. We believe that the current inspection and enforcement regime is ineffective and does not protect the most vulnerable of workers who actually have more need to use the system. We, as Congress, both Congress and the Northern Ireland Strategic Migration Partnership have advocated a creation of a single enforcement and inspection regime in Northern Ireland, similar to other EU countries, or at the very least, better cooperation and information sharing among existing agencies. Other issues that I wish to point out, which relate to a broader issue of employability, is the need for targeted support for employability of foreign nationals, and in particular, recognition of qualifications, especially for workers from outside the EU, and the utilisation of skills. As we know, many BME people have work well below their skill and qualification level, and also another one which is crucially important, designating ESOL as an essential skill. You want to speak about that?
Yeah, I will speak about the health. Having been a consultant in the National Health Service for over 32 years, I think I could speak about health a little bit more than my other colleagues. There is clearly a lack of and problem of access, essentially due to language barrier. The lack of information about the entitlement of the treatment, which is also a very important factor. A lot of my patients had complained that they don't know how to approach the National Health Service and what sort of treatment they are entitled to. The recent squeeze in the health service funding is also going to be a major problem in the provision of health care. The life expectancy of the people from DME, and especially those who have migrated to Northern Ireland, is lower than the indigenous population of Northern Ireland. Similarly, the maternal and infant mortality rates are quite high among the BME group. All these factors relate to one important thing, and that is the provision of the healthcare is perhaps not equal. What we need is an equality in the provision of healthcare for everyone. That is the ethos of the racial equality document, that is TBUC, together building a united community. And that can only be achieved if we have equality in the provision of healthcare. We also know that the BME, particularly those who have recently migrated due to war, displacement, or other reasons, have especially mental health issues, and that is also not freely available to those people. I think I will just stop this health thing here, except that one other point I wish to make, and that is the unfair stereotyping of the patients who are coming from ethnic minority background. For example, a lady was waiting in the hospital for several hours, and when she inquired, why am I not being seen by the consultant, she was told that they are waiting for the interpreter to come. And she said, well, I'm doing a PhD in chemistry in the Queen's University. And that is a completely a very nonsensical response to patients waiting for that period. That means that we do need a special program of training of the front desk staff in the National Health Service. Is that all okay for me?
Yes, thanks, Chair, and the member of the panel, Ashok Sharma, the Inequality Center. My main concern is the education of the BME children. They face a number of barriers to educational achievement, including limited English language ability. When I say limited English language ability, these are the recent migration, not the permanent settle like Indians and Pakistanis. They are well versed in that. Then lack of knowledge of the education system, racist bullying and social exclusion. Ethnic minority people experience lower level of belonging and higher level of exclusion compared to their white settled in Northern Ireland, Northern Irish peers. Next one is poor educational achievement of some minority ethnic groups, in particular Afro-Caribbean and travelers. The serious problem currently BME people occupy both the top and the bottom in terms of educational achievements. Children with broken education or lack of formal education are particularly disadvantaged. People don't see their culture and language being reflected in the curriculum, as this should be addressed as a part of citizenship classes. The development of first community languages of people should be encouraged and promoted. Barriers to participation and progression of BME people need to be identified and addressed. Bullying is very important, is a very issue and serious issue of concern in the majority of cases. Schools tend to lack of knowledge on how to control, how to deal with or effectively confront this issue. Targeted strategies and training should be employed to target this issue. That's my conclude my.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Bernadette McCalliskey and I work with the South Tyrone Empowerment Programme. And the issues I've been asked to take on behalf of the panel are to look at the local level, to look at the level where communities are interacting. I think if we follow our panel across, we can see how work needs to be done at every level. So we're talking from the implementation of legislation right down to where people are living and working and going to school in the shared space, which bringing our racial equality strategy and a need for a strong strategy into the broader remit of building a strong and united community that is a more diverse question than simply bringing the two traditional communities together. Key issues around that, I think, is a recognition of significant good work that is going on. There is good practice out there in terms of work in all of the issues that we have mentioned, but there is a lack of strategic coherence around that within a racial equality strategy, that people can see where they fit in, what strategies they are working to, and how they are contributing to collective overall aims. There's a great opportunity, I think, if we look at the intersection of tools that we do have. We have Section 75, we have the race relations legislation, which needs to be strengthened. We have a number of strategies, but they're not sitting cohesively together to allow for the necessary positive action, particularly in relation of developing the great resource of skills, qualifications that we have within the minority ethnic community itself, or with raising the awareness and building on the willingness of the majority communities to move over, to share, and to be part of a more diverse community. Part of that issue is around recognising evidence bases at local level, seeing what works and what doesn't work, and bringing adequate resources to that position. Not always necessarily financial resources, but bringing skill and strategic opportunities, but also bringing the best use of what funding is available. Significant good work has gone ahead around, and all of us have worked well with the Racial Equality Unit through the Minority Ethnic Development Fund, and by and large that has been very effective. There have been areas around capacity, maybe with small funds, but the development of racial equality should not be financially dependent upon the small Minority Ethnic Development Fund. There has to be a responsibility at every department, be that DEL, be that Department of Education, to clearly identify how they are ring-fencing finances for racial equality. In education, particularly for the education of travellers and the secure of higher levels of achievement for traveller children and new migrant children who have an issue with English. I think we have all the ingredients of bringing this together. What we're short of is a racial equality strategy.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I wish to make some comments about the coordination and the accountability part of the racial strategy. This long-awaited document is extremely important, and an important document like this should have a very robust and strong accountability strategy. Unfortunately, that was missing. The role of the OFM-DFM in the coordination across departments, especially integrating racial equality into work of the departments, and action reported to the Northern Ireland Assembly Security Committee, Scrutiny Committee. The transparency and formal reporting structures against written actions, timeframes, and resources. These are the key elements of a proper coordination and accountability. One of the other factors which is very important in terms of accountability is the appointment of the Racial Equality Panel. Unfortunately, the panel appointed for the previous strategy document was rather a mysterious appointment. It was non-transparent. What is needed is a transparent appointment of the Racial Equality Panel according to the Public Service Appointment Procedures. It should also include the members and representatives of the BME community. Without their active participation, such a panel would be of no great help. And I think it is not only that there should be a proper descent from the top to the lower departments in terms of accountability and coordination. either by the appointment of a person who is responsible, like so-called champion, or some other method. But we recommend that it should be a very transparent mechanism which is acceptable and accessible to all members of the ethnic minority. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much indeed. A number of issues for us to take into consideration there and to raise with the department. Can I focus on the racial equality panel that you raise at the end, Dr. Khan? The consultation on the draft racial equality strategy indicates that the consultation paper was prepared in close consultation with the racial equality panel. Obviously, the common platform has a significant number of BME organisations, I think you said in the region of 80, represented in that umbrella body. Are any members of the Common Platform represented on the Racial Equality panel?
Yes.
And if yes, to what extent?
I think a couple of the key people sit over here. They are the panel member, including CLC, and also the Equality Commission colleague there as well.
Okay, and would that characterisation of close consultation in relation to the strategy ring true with your experience then?
Not my experience, Mr. Chairman. We found that it was a completely out of blue document, and we were informed only partially that there is something going on about it, and there was no member of the Belfast Islamic Centre community in the panel. Although despite representing a very large section of the BME community in Northern Ireland. And it was really, I thought that this panel appointment should have been more open and more transparent. And without a transparent appointment panel, I think this type of exercise is not going to be of great help and does not invoke a great deal of confidence.
Okay. I think that's something that we can raise with the department. You also mentioned the need for robust monitoring in relation to progress in relation to the racial equality strategy. Do you see the racial equality panel being able to fulfil that type of role?
Yeah, it is, if it is given the appropriate powers, and it has access to the scrutiny committee and to the ministerial level committee, only then it can have the power. Also, we should recommend that the co-chairperson should be a member of the community who can have direct access to the scrutiny committee.
Okay, and in terms of the production of the strategy, my understanding is the timelines that we're working to were that the consultation was scheduled for April 14, published in June 14, concluded in October 14, and we're still waiting for the production of the strategy in March 15. Have you any explanation or understanding as to why such time has lapsed in relation to the production of the strategy?
I think you're better to ask the official because they're after us.
Fair response. Okay, I'd like to bring in David McElveen.
Thanks very much, Chair. I'm getting placed again. Thank you very much for your presentation. I just want to get a little bit of a clarification on maybe just a couple of the issues that were raised. First of all, you, Dr. Khan, you'd raised about the issue of language barriers in health. I'd taken a little bit of an interest in this just towards the end of last year in October, and I'd asked a few questions, and I was led to believe that we have a fairly good interpreting service here in Northern Ireland, as opposed, and for clinics as well, for GP appointments, dentists.
That is where it is not absolutely up to the mark, but in the hospitals there is a fairly good interpretation service.
So are you saying that there isn't interpreting services for
I shouldn't use the word there isn't, but I would use the word that it is not up to the mark.
Right, because certainly I was assured, I mean, just as a snapshot, that at the minute there are 39 Lithuanian interpreters, there's 22 Russian interpreters, 15 Hungarian, 25 Portuguese. So there certainly appeared to be a provision there.
Indeed. Indeed.
So the language barrier issue.
Often a patient arrives at the GP clinic with a short notice.
Yes.
And then there is not an interpreter available for that particular language. And the patient herself or himself, usually herself, tries to communicate with the GP and does not give the full information about the details of her health. And that can create a problem.
So I think the problem is not so much the quality of the interpreting service, because I think this is a good quality service and it has a very good database, but perhaps the surgeries and hospitals being aware of the service and using it to the extent that they should with every patient who they perceive to have a language need.
I suppose what I'm trying to establish is, I mean, looking even, bearing in mind that obviously in Northern Ireland, we are a devolved region of the United Kingdom. If you, to the best of my knowledge, as a foreign national were to go to hospital in England, Scotland or Wales, even if notice was given, an interpreting services is not actually provided there.
Yeah. I think if I might raise an issue there, one of the things that we do have here is the 75th most important thing in the Good Friday Agreement, which is a bit sad. But at least we do have Section 75 of the Northern Ireland Act, which quite clearly sets out the need to ensure the protection of those who are particularly vulnerable to inequalities in terms of accessing opportunity and accessing services to which they have a fundamental human right. So you may well be right that the opportunity for a person whose health depends on understanding something is better served in Northern Ireland. I don't think any of us would deny that around interpreting. But I think there are a number of issues that arise. One is the understanding of the service user, who's the most vulnerable person, that they have an entitlement to that support, and two, the pressure on the service provider to make a judgment in terms of balancing the immediate need of that client against possibly the financial cost of providing the service, which is an unfair position to put the service provider in. But the reality for the person using the services, because my organisation also provides interpreters and trains interpreters, and we back up the regional interpreting service when they can't do short notice appointments. There are two problems with that. It's very, very difficult for any person to discover a diagnosis of cancer, but not to be able to understand that you're being told you have cancer. You know, these are real issues, and we're right. We do have good potential, but it's about bringing those things together. It's about people being aware of them, and people also in the service provision having cultural competence and confidence to recognise that people have a right and a need to that shouldn't necessarily be balanced against the cost of it. It's the cost of not doing it, and it's the cost of not doing it to the health service, to the education service. If a person was denied their basic rights because we failed to make the information available to them in a way they understood it. So it could be very costly to the health service. You know, money's the issue. Very, very costly to deny the person that. And we have to make it work better. Lives depend on it.
I suppose what I'm trying to get my head around, and I have raised this with similar groups before, and I'm yet to get an answer that just helps it engage in my brain, because I genuinely want to engage. In that, I mean, Monday night, for example, I spent the evening with a number of people from Belfast Jewish community, and a lot of these people are senior citizens now, and they came here as Eastern European migrants. Many of them didn't speak English. Many of them didn't have a lot of skills. There was no such thing as a racial equality strategy. There was no such thing as an interpreting service. There was no such thing as Section 75. But yet these people seem to have assimilated very successfully. And it's not just exclusively the Jewish community. There was obviously a number of Italian migrants who came over around the same time. And I genuinely want to get my head around this, because it just seems to me that we used to do this a lot better without the, and I'm going to sound like a libertarian here, but without the interference of government. it almost appears that the interference of government is actually holding things back here. And I want to try and just get my head, because I generally want to engage. And I suppose maybe what I would ask is that, maybe perhaps with respect, Barton, with the exception of you, because you'll understand why when I say it, each of the panellists along here brings a degree of outside of Northern Ireland and UK experience as well. And it might be helpful maybe just for me to understand, in the countries that you represent, that you previously would have belonged to, what degree of racial equality strategy was in place, in different words obviously, to aid ethnic minorities that might have been living? I'm generally trying to understand just what we can learn from your experience as well, because I think it'd be really, really helpful, because I think this has to be a two-way conversation.
I think you need to put into the context in most of our country of origin, the so-called non-Chinese or non-Indian or non-Polish, in relation to that population, pretty small and also pretty very new, trend. Now, going back to the question you asked early on, I was the only outsider sit at the DHSS review committee on the interpretation services. I think the issue here is quite simple. There already a system quite well in place to accommodate the needs of all ethnic minority about, the language issue. But I understand, like the older generation, much more difficult, like the Jewish community, because there's no one, being volunteered to be trained to provide, the Jewish language or the Judas. So that is, they were facing. I give you some figure. The financial year 2012-13, because it was, the review year there. On that year, we're talking about over 80,000 interpretation section in that financial year. It is quite high. 80,000. You're not talking about 8,000, 18,000, 80,000. Majority of these sessions are under the GP. 80% are GP. So that's why from the review panel, we know that the bigger issue is about the hospital or the other part of primary care and also the secondary care, like those consultants. They have less users on that kind of services. But of course, occasionally there's still something like Dr. Gan mentioned. A lot of issues about the GP administrator. When someone phone in, might not be the person who uses services who could speak the English, but the patient who couldn't speak the English. So that's why you have a situation. The people came to the clinic, then they realized they couldn't speak the language. So there are different ways they could sort it out. But of course, this is a bigger issue. My sense is, in terms of accessibility, more or less we should tackle the problem. Now, at the moment, the healthcare system, they more focus on hospital, consultant like Benedict mentioned about very difficult to understand about cancer. If someone have cancer, no one give them the right information about who get the cancer. So these are the very technical part we need to deal with in the future. But in a general sense, the accessibility to the healthcare services, to a certain extent, we have been achieved a lot compared with 10 years ago.
Well, if I can ask you maybe a question, because I'm not sure whether I understood your question. You were saying that the older communities, the established communities, seem to fare better than the new communities, or they seem to be integrating better. Was that your comment?
Not necessarily, because apologies if that's the way it sounded. I suppose I'm saying that older generation of people who were migrants in the early 1900s to Northern Ireland, okay, they've had time on their side, and I appreciate that we're dealing with a relatively new sort of wave of migration, and we welcome it, of course. But they came to a Northern Ireland that was every bit as divided as the Northern Ireland today. They came to a Northern Ireland that had no such thing as a racial equality strategy. It wasn't even on the cards. They came to a Northern Ireland that had no support for migrant communities in relation to interpreting services and so on and so forth. And I suppose I'm just struggling to get my head around what is the difference between that group and the group that we have now.
Well, I think these people that where they're living today, they would be grateful for the support that we are giving, you know, the new migrants, if we are giving that support, because I think sometimes it's not enough. We can't be just expecting from people to come and work for $6.50 an hour and not give anything in return to them, you know, in terms of. So we are happy to accept doctors and nurses that come from, you know, India and other continents, but we are not happy to give them the same provision as patients, the same support when they come to, you know, when they fall sick. We have to look at the, you know, the balance of things that are happening out there. You know, that's not just a one-way situation.
Well,
you know.
Again, I'm sorry.
Can I Ashok wants to come in here, and I think we're going to have to move on shortly as well.
The interpreting service did exist that time as well. It was voluntary because being the third generation of Indian and my children being the fourth generation of Indian, when my father-in-law, his father came from India in 1949, and there were only 130 Indians then, you know, grew up. What they did, they took their children as interpreter to explain to the doctor. But at that time, because society was so much engulfed, you know, in their own problems, they didn't know whether this other section, Indian, Pakistani, or Jews even existed. You see? Now, after the Good Friday Agreement, things have totally changed. Being the only Hindu chaplain in HSC, I cover a lot of hospitals as well. Sometimes I've been called to explain, we can't get the interpreter, Ashok, can you come? And don't get paid even for that, but we do oblige. As you said it, at that time, it was a need to be successful. Now the children have grown up, they are successful. This old age pensioner, they need not to learn any more English, but the new migrants, they need to learn the local system, the local health system, everything. But what comes in between? The language barrier. The language barrier comes, interpretation. Where it comes, they find they're totally isolated. There's nobody to help it. I mean, I was in Royal Hospital 2 days ago, delivering lecture on how to deal with the Hindus when they're dying. And my audience were all pathologists. And the staff, those who deal with it, they had no clue what we explained them. So there's a progression there, but there's a gap, there's institutional gap there. Because that has to be addressed.
Okay.
Thank you,
Okay, David, yep. We still don't have a racial equality strategy, by the way, just in case you're making it sound like we do. Megan, Farron, you want to come in?
Yeah,
Yep.
thanks, Chris. I suppose just in terms of the new council structures, do you feel there are opportunities are to maybe focus more on local work that's happening that can be overlooked and is often most effective? And is there anything missing from new councils, or is there anything you'd like to see within those new council structures? And I'm thinking of my own area in particular and other rural communities where isolation can be even more of a problem.
I think the council, under the current race law, there's a specific provision within the current race legislation. Article 67, if I correct rightly, it requests a duty to all the local council to promote racial equality and also to promote racial relation in between different ethnic groups. So there are something there, but unfortunately, most of the council, they don't know or they ignore it. So for me, there's already some very basic there, and how we make sure the super council should know this, alongside with like the Section 85 as well as other legislation. They should do it. I think nice and happy if this super council they would like to do training, we could help them to make sure they know this law. And I think it's very important they have a duty to promote race equality. I think as Benedict and other colleagues say rightly, when we talk about race strategy, not only about the OFM, DFM, it's cut across all departments, including, more important, the local council on the ground if we try to promote wider racial equality and also good relation.
Okay. I've had a late burst of interest here, so I might ask you to try and keep your questions and your responses as concise as possible. Megan, do you want to respond? Yeah.
Just two other issues then. I would like to know if there are any examples of good practice in councils across the north. But then I suppose in terms of keeping on that sort of level, obviously progressive institutions produce better policies, and representation is a problem for us for a number of groups in society. So what's your take on positive action or affirmative action in terms of trying to improve that, not just for BME communities but for women, for LGBT communities? And
if I could just say on good practice on councils. In the last round of peace, which was Peace 3, because of the high level of new migrant workers and immigrants in the west and rural areas, there's quite a battle fought with the European partnership on the right of new migrants to access European peace funds. And the cluster Magherafelt, Dungannon, Cookstown, Fermanagh had a very, very good migrant engagement programme as an integral part of the peace programme, and an integral part of a three-way process between the nationalist, unionist and new migrant communities. And there was some very excellent work done. Newry Council, through the Challenge of Change programme, was an excellent good practice programme. And certainly at local council and sub-regional level, the Racial Equality Unit itself through MEDF has funded very good practice. The key issue, I think, is being able to learn from those and mainstream some of that practice into local government, into the new council broad strategies for council-supported work, rather than just always keeping it in a pocket of work that is expected to be funded out of the Minority Ethnic Development Fund, as opposed to be an integral part of community funding, which supports, actively supports BME communities, building of capacity, shared space, etc., around minority ethnicity as well as the two majority communities. The good practice is there. There's some bad practice too, but there's good practices there. It's about councils and policymakers learning from it.
In terms of underrepresentation and lack of participation, I think that is a serious issue in terms of black and minority ethnic communities. And there have been a number of initiatives that have been taken, for example, by NISM, such as BME Parliament, which I think was an enormous success, and we need more resources and more funding to support initiatives like that, because that was a sort of one-off, but it was an immense success. And in terms of sort of a more mainstream ideas, how to, rather than sort of piecemeal approach to that, introduction of quota for underrepresented groups such as women and minority ethnic people, and that would, well, I hope would be something to be considered by the Assembly.
Alex Atwood.
Well, first of all, could I thank you because the evidence that you've given today and the fact that you represent such a range of organisations and people in Northern Ireland, it does remind me a wee bit of a hearing or committee meeting in September 2013 when the then Victims Commission came to the committee and advised of multiple concerns that she had in terms of the rollout of the victim strategy. And I think we'd be well advised to hear what you're saying today in the same way that we heard what she said in September 2013 in terms of the concerns you have in terms of the racial equality strategy. My own view is that when it comes to critical issues in Northern Ireland, what you need to have is a strong law, firm enforcement and good practice. And if you don't have all three, then issues that are fundamental to the character of our society and to the integration within our society, then you don't have it. And that's the answer, from my point of view, to David's question, that whilst there may have been times in the past when migrants were able to integrate more fully into our society, and I'm not necessarily agreeing with that point, but if you do make that point, then there's a lot of other examples where it is only because of good law, firm enforcement and best practice that you've actually been able to build an inclusive society, including in 1998 with the Northern Ireland Act in Section 75 and all the other structures before and since and laws before and since that have been brought. So it's the same when it comes to racial equality and strong law, hard enforcement and best practice. Sorry about that. The questions I have, though, it goes back to what you said at the beginning, because they were pretty fundamental questions that you raised, and then you gave evidence when it comes to jobs, economic opportunity, education and health. But the questions I have are, you said that the evidence was flawed when it came to the draft strategy. The evidence was flawed. And that's a very big statement, because if the evidence is flawed, then the actions are flawed, whatever actions they might be, because you indicate there's a lack of actions as well. So could you just elaborate further in terms of the evidence being flawed? And secondly, and this is where I do agree with you, the need for a single enforcement and inspection regime, because what does that look like? What is a single inspection enforcement regime? So there's a lot of other things I'd like to ask. Those two, evidence flawed, and what does a single enforcement inspection regime look like?
So I guess I can probably answer that. In terms of evidence, our problem was that the evidence included in the draft racial equality strategy was outdated, basically. The strategy didn't even utilize the latest census figures. It used census figures from 2001. So basically the situation then was dramatically different from what we have now. That the makeup of ethnic minorities was completely different, and hence the problems that were out there, you know, were quite different. And now we are, at the moment, we are facing a completely different set of issues that, especially that newcomers have, and a separate set of issues that established minorities have here. So that's why the evidence needs to be improved, needs to take, and there has been quite a lot of research produced in the last 10 or so years from various quarters, from various organizations to show what inequalities minority ethnic people suffer and all that. In terms of the single enforcement and inspection body, this is something that the Irish Congress of Trade Unions and the Northern Ireland Strategic Migration Partnership are advocating, because it seems that migrant workers, whenever they experience problems at work, they are reluctant to go and raise a grievance with their employer, because they do not want to put their head above the parapet. They fear of being dismissed and of suffering the consequences. The single enforcement body exists in majority of EU states. It's an umbrella organization. They can take anonymously a complaint from a complainant and pursue it on their behalf, for a collective group of workers or for individual workers. Something similar like that exists in the Republic of Ireland. It's called NERA, and it seems to be quite a success. The problem in here, we were told, is that the responsibility for enforcement and inspection falls under 5 or 6 different agencies. And whilst some of them are devolved, some of them are non-devolved. So, for example, we have Gang Masters Licensing Authority, which only inspects agencies operating in food processing. That's only the remit of work. We've got HMRC, which prosecutes for national minimum wage. We have Health and Safety Inspectorate, which is for health and safety, and so on and so forth. DEL then enforces the agency workers regulations. So that's why, because it's so fragmented, it's so difficult to access, especially for people who are not from here and who are just so afraid of taking their complaints anywhere. And then tribunal, okay, you can also take your case to the tribunal, but that process is quite expensive and quite complicated for most of minority ethnic people to navigate.
Can I elaborate more about the census figure? I think it also answered part of the question raised by David early on. I think you're looking at, the migration trend starting from 2000. Before that, the settled ethnic minority people, either they have jobs or they run the business during the Troubles. So that's why, like the Jewish community, Chinese community, Indian community, or the Asian community in particular from Pakistan and in particular on the whole NHS system. So they have, the job. But now the new migrant, they are doing the low-paid job. They are, doing, unsecure job. So that's why the first casualty is started in 08-09 when the economic downturn started. I think the current, racial inequality are far worse than 10, 15 years ago. And I think that exactly this committee and also the whole assembly need to redress. Of course, we're still carrying the back from the previous old race strategy. When they started, the migration just come. But now this time, we have more and more, data set and information about the extent of exploitation, the extent of, discrimination, the extent of, social exclusion. So I think we need to look at that context to develop this strategy alongside with the other. Otherwise, we miss the point. And I think I must say, at the moment, the population of non-settled one are few times more than, the original settled ethnic minority. So you can see the scale has been changed a lot since then.
Okay. Alec Maskey.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation this afternoon. Again, it's been very informative, and certainly I would want to just put on record our serious disappointment that we don't have a far more advanced set of protections for people of different races from the BME community. So I want to put that on record. I think it is very disappointing that politically we haven't managed to secure that. I mean, I think that the promise of the Good Friday Agreement was that we would have a fair society, probably an exemplar society. We should have the highest standards of rights to protect everybody, and everybody's a winner. And the fact that we haven't got that shows a big flaw in our own society still. And we have a lot of work to do to address that. And I would have hoped, as many others would have had, that we would be operating the highest international standards of rights, because that's where we all win. And I think everybody collectively would agree with that. But notwithstanding that, I mean, obviously, I think it is a bit of a mixed bag. From my own experience, I see some brilliant examples of people working together and tackling challenges. There have been progress, no doubt, but I don't think in terms of David's contribution earlier on, you cannot compare decades ago. You can't even compare 2 decades ago, maybe even 1 decade ago, in the way in which some areas have fairly dramatically changed. So the challenges are greater, the needs are greater, the need for protection is greater, and the need to win and to benefit from the good practice. I mean, Bernadette, you've identified some areas of good example there, and I know there are a lot of other examples there where people in local communities are working very well together. There are some institutional bodies which are working very well, but I think, for me, I think it's the central point that you're making collectively is that we need to mainstream this work, because it's not enough to have a good minority ethnic fund. That's all very important. It's good. We benefit from that. But to have a Mela and Botanic or whatever else, it's all great, but it's not tackling the problem. I think it's good that it's putting a face on it and it's showing and highlighting different cultures and communities. But I think that what we need to do, really get the kernel of this, is to get the rights established and to mainstream this. Because I think, Ashok, you mentioned institutional gaps in there. It should be easier now that we have a smaller number of councils to replicate the good practice that is there currently across all of the councils, because there wouldn't be one council area in either of the 11 councils which wouldn't have greater diversity than what they would have had 10, 15, 20 years ago. So they will all benefit from it, and they will all need to avail of good practice. And people living in those communities will need to benefit from their rights. So I just think that, I mean, I certainly would be, speaking on our behalf here, we would want to see the protections enshrined, a far better, more advanced racial equality strategy in place. And I think for us, it is about making sure that as Ali Gatwood early on did refer to, it's about having strong law, it's about having the highest standards of protection. For me, it is clearly about enforcement and delivery. But at the heart of all that has to be inclusivity. Of people from different communities and different backgrounds aren't at the heart of the strategy development, then it's going to be flawed from the outset, in my opinion. Because whatever about my view and my politics, unless they're at the table, there's nobody else going to represent me. I don't care who they are. They represent me and people like me. So that has to apply to everybody else in every other community. So all I would want to be saying is, in terms of from Megan and myself here this afternoon, that we certainly would want to be working with yourselves. Do very much appreciate the work that you all do. I'm aware of a big lot of it and have worked with a number of you over the years, and just want to wish you luck and keep up the good lobbying, because one thing is different nowadays. You have put a much more strong, positive, constructive face on the different levels of diversity that we as a community have here. So I think you need to keep that up and just try to keep marshalling support in defence of the arguments that you're making. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Okay, I'd just like to... Sorry, Jimmy, did you want to? No? Sure. Thank you very much indeed for coming to the committee today. I'd like to give you sincere thanks on behalf of all of the committee members for the detail into which you've been able to go there in terms of the issues that we need to see addressed by the racial equality strategy. We obviously have the department following you afterwards here, maybe you'll be able to stay and see how many of those issues are addressed or not addressed at this stage. We certainly as a committee want to remain closely engaged with you to ensure that we see these issues addressed robustly by the racial equality strategy as soon as possible. So thank you very much indeed for coming here today. Thank you. Okay, members, time is moving on, so we now move to our briefing from departmental officials. In your packs at page 192, you'll find correspondence from the department which provides information on the initial findings from the consultation process. I'd like to welcome the officials from the department who are joining us today, which is Mr. Ken Fraser, Head of the Racial Equality Unit. Very welcome, Ken. You want to go ahead? Okay, Ken. Okay. Expecting more? Okay. Okay, members, we're now also joined by Dr. Dennis McMahon, Director of Equality, Good Relations and Economic Policy Directorate, and Mrs. Lindsay Farrell, the United Community Secretariat. You're all very welcome here today. Thank you very much indeed for coming along, and we're looking forward to hearing from you in relation to the initial findings on the Racial Equality Strategy consultation. Would you like to start by making brief opening remarks, and then we can take some questions?
Very happy to be there.
One or two for you.
Keep them brief because I know you'll want to get into questions. But I suppose just to give you some sense of some of the messages that have been coming through, and you may have heard some of these already. I suppose it's worth maybe just saying that the consultation on the racial equality strategy took place in summer of autumn last year, starting on the 19th of June and finishing on the 10th of October. The consultation document, and it was a consultation document and not a strategy, I think it's important to just distinguish between those two terms. A sense of belonging, delivering social change through a racial equality strategy for Northern Ireland, was developed in conjunction with the Racial Equality Panel, which is made up of minority ethnic representatives and representatives of the wider community. There were 6 public events in Belfast, Dungannon, Newry, Craigavon, Derry, Londonderry and Ballymena. And the locations were selected on the size, in light of the size of the BME population, according to the 2011 census. So we wanted to try and tailor it to make sure that we were getting as much response as possible. There was an online survey, and presentations were made upon request to academic institutions and local groups and trade unions. There were 10 chapters and specific questions within each of those chapters, built around six aims: elimination of racial inequality, combating racism and hate crime, equality of service provision, participation, social cohesion and capacity building. And I suppose a lot of issues come out of that, but some of the most popular issues, to put it in terms of most issues that were most often raised, were around legislative reform, the desire to have a baseline assessment, an action plan, a need for clear links with Together Building a United Community and delivering social change, and adequate ring-fenced funding for the strategy. I mean, this obviously affected the response, and people were, I suppose, in summary, people were looking for, as you would expect, more concrete actions and concrete commitments around specific targets. So the idea was to really to try to analyse those, and we've kind of broken them down into a number of responses. So the issues that were most common were legislative reform, baseline assessment, wanting the strategy to be accompanied by an action plan, clear links and ring-fenced. The issue that was most frequently commented on was the need for legislative reform, with 51% or 50 people coming forward and asking about or asking us to agree a reform of the Race Relations Northern Ireland Order and to make this a priority. None of the responses disagreed with that. There was also responses that agreed legislative reform, also agreed with the Equality Commission's proposals on reform, and I won't list those now, but you may be familiar with them, but we can take you through those. But really they're about strengthening the legislative basis. There were no additional suggestions for legislative reform. We were also 37%, 36 people explicitly called for a baseline assessment, and 24 people, 24% said that this assessment should consist of using existing research, and 17 said that new research is required. 37%, 36 people wanted adequate or ring-fenced funding. 34%, 33 people said that there needed to be clear links between the racial equality strategy and both book and delivering social change. And 32% thought the strategy needed to be accompanied by a cross-departmental action plan. There are other major themes that have emerged, these are the major themes that emerged. There are others, obviously. And one of the things I suppose that came through was particularly around the need for a refugee integration strategy and for Roma and traveller strategies. And we had quite a significant response around those. And some template responses that came in large numbers around those, just to say that. So obviously you'll have had some briefing already around some of the issues that people would want to see raised, but we would very much welcome this as an opportunity to make sure that the strategy, as it's developed, builds in those views and reflects them, and results as as strong a document as possible to be able to deliver for a very vulnerable and potentially disadvantaged group. So thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks for your opening comments. I'm encouraged to a certain extent that you do seem to have identified some of the plethora of issues that have been raised in relation to the consultation document. Can I ask you first in relation to the timelines? The committee received a briefing in March 2014 that the consultation would be published in April 2014. It was published in June 2014. The consultation on the document closed in October 2014, and we're now at March 2015. What is the explanation for the delay, and when can we expect publication of the racial equality strategy?
Well, I think there are a number of factors around where getting to this point, and obviously it took a lot longer than we would have collectively wanted, but there were key decisions to be taken at each point in that, and it just took some time to get to where we've got to. I think moving forward, what we would want to see is the strategy being developed over the summer months, taking into account the views, and we're currently arranging meetings with stakeholders to make sure that we're getting those views on board, and particularly the common platform. And there's
Sorry, Dennis, I hear you say you looked to develop the strategy over the coming months or the summer months?
Summer months, yeah.
Of this year?
Yeah.
Okay. You think it's that far away?
Well, it depends on, I suppose it depends on getting, well, there's a couple of factors. One of the factors is that there is a view that we should do the baseline work before then. So we want to do as much of the baselining around the actual statistics.
But you received these responses prior to October 2014. So has any work begun on developing the strategy then?
Work has.
Yeah, the consultation formally closed on the 10th of October 2014, but there were some late submissions that were accepted after that, the approvals of ministers right up until the end of October into November. But the analysis of all of those responses has been ongoing since that. Some of them were quite significant responses, and I think the consultation has shown a very high response rate as well, which is really positive. So we need to give it really the attention that it deserves and take on board the issues that have been raised throughout that. So we've been continuing with the analysis, and we've been in a position to put forward a more detailed analysis to ministers in the coming weeks then.
Okay. I imagine some listeners will find that quite concerning that we're still talking about those particular timescales before production of a strategy, but that's the update that we receive.
Sorry, Chair, could I also add, it has been really useful to engage particularly with what was known as the Common Platform Group. We met with them just before Christmas, and we gave a commitment at that stage, due to the range of issues that were being raised, that we would go back to the group and engage further. Now, since then, we've had some discussions with CRC, who were leading on the work with that, and because of that, that has been widened out. That invitation has been widened out much wider than the signatories to the Common Platform, to take in as wide a range of minority ethnic groups as possible, and a date for that's in the diary for mid-April. So it'll be very useful to pick up then with groups again on really to drill down into the detail of the issues that have been raised through the analysis.
Okay, well, perhaps we can get into some more of the detailed concerns then, and you can update us as to what progress is being made in relation to those. Picking up on what you've mentioned about what sounds like a degree of improved consultation across the sector, how does that impact on concerns in relation to the configuration and appointment of the racial equality panel itself?
It's fair to say that the racial equality panel membership has been stable for a wee while. They were appointed a good wee while ago, but
what's a good wee while, Ken?
Matter of years, 2 or 3 years at least. But we did have representation of a number of key people from within the minority ethnic sector, amongst others. We had Patrick, for instance, Deirdre from CRC, Paul Yam from WAHEP, Katie Radford from the Belfast Jewish Community. I could go on, the number of people there.
Are there any specific proposals around
getting
the panel or changing the appointment process for the panel?
We would intend to pick that up and dust it down and refresh it for taking work on the implementation of the strategy forward, yes. There was the suggestion that it was not... there was a lack of transparency in how this process went about. I mean, perhaps in looking at it in retrospect, it seemed untransparent, but at the time, everyone understood it, everyone was quite happy with it, and it involved people putting their own names forward. It couldn't have been more transparent.
Yeah, I suppose from what I've heard today is that engagement with the wide number of organisations that are available to input into a robust strategy is what we should be looking for. So if there's a way to improve how the racial equality panel does that, then I'd be interested to hear what you're going to do to ensure that takes place. Yeah.
Certainly, in terms of the session in mid-April, when we're re-engaging with all of the groups again, one of the things that we're keen to focus on is the implementation of the strategy, and I would say the architecture and the structures underneath that in terms of the panel and other similar structures that might come out as being the focus of that
Okay.
meeting.
I think we'll probably come to that as well. Yes, so that's helpful. In terms of the concerns in relation to the evidence base, the data on which the consultation document was based, some concerns that was data from as long ago as 2001. Would you like to respond to those concerns?
I'm happy to respond to that. The point I was making, and I'm sorry that I didn't make it clearer, was that lots of the issues that were there in 2001 continued to be the same issues that were there in 2014 when the consultation document was published. We had evidence from both the Paul Connolly evidence from 2002, I think it was, and evidence from Joseph Rowntree in 2014. And the point I was making was that we should have moved more. We should be pushing things further. We have put together a paper now. We've commissioned a paper on the evidence base, so we have a much sounder grasp on the evidence base, and I think hopefully we will be able to share that with people fairly shortly.
Okay, is that going to be a contribution towards establishing that the scale of the challenge and the baseline of the issues?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Respected academics have done an evidence gathering exercise on it. So,
what stage is that exercise at?
That exercise is at final draft.
Okay. Another significant concern that you've rightly acknowledged is in relation to the race relations law in Northern Ireland and how that has fallen behind pace with the rest of the UK, Europe and international standards. Can you update the committee as to what proposals are in place in order to address that particular issue?
Well, we've looked at, we have over the last, well, I don't remember the exact date of it, but over the last 2 years, we've certainly looked at the full range of equality legislation internally to see, well, where are the gaps, and looked at including obviously racial equality issues. We've also had an update from, or we've also had views by the Equality Commission. And we would certainly, there's no doubt that the legislation needs to be looked at and strengthened. And on the back of this, we would certainly see proposals going to ministers to consider around what that legislation would look like. And
what's the timescale for putting those proposals to ministers?
That would be part of the implementation. That would be part of the action plan. It would be one of the key elements of the action plan would be to get proposals in place. So the idea would be to put those again. This is not. We're not going to wait until the strategy is published. These proposals will be developed alongside the strategy over the summer months.
Yep, Dennis, I think in our previous evidence session we had an allusion to the fact that update of that race relations law is now beyond 2009, when there was an Assembly motion unanimously supporting update of the race relations law. So you'll appreciate people will want more clarity and accuracy than in line with the implementation plan. So do you have a particular timescale deadline in mind as to when you will be putting proposals in relation to race relations law to the ministers?
Well,
over the coming weeks we'll be sending a detailed submission to ministers with all of the issues and the analysis coming out of the consultation, and obviously one of those issues will be the most pertinent issue really will be the reform of the race relations order in the legislation.
Did it surprise you that that was one of the most commonly raised issues in the consultation?
No.
No.
Being blunt about it, no, it didn't. I suppose it just, we need to, the bottom line with all of this is we need to get, the consultation process is important. We need to, and we have taken it seriously. The question now is how quickly we can get that translated.
How much of a priority do you think prompt production of the strategy and action plan is for ministers at this moment in time?
I think ministers would see it as very much as a top priority. That would be my understanding.
Okay, and in terms of the action plan and monitoring, there's obviously some detailed submissions made in relation to that, which go as far as, if I heard correctly, the need for cross-departmental action plan, cross-departmental monitoring and a call on the Assembly committees to get directly involved in monitoring of progress on that action plan. Can you give us any more detail in relation to what you think that might look like?
I mean, I think all that. I mean, the first thing I would say about that is I think that's very welcome. There's no doubt about it that this cannot be an OFM DFM strategy. It has to be a cross-departmental strategy, and all the departments have to, as indeed they are at the minute, but they have to continue to pull their weight, and we have to make sure that all the departments across the board pull their weight on this. One of the things that I suppose we looked at in this was the delivering social change and together building united community structures to see whether there was ways of using those, because one of the things that we've experienced in the past has been setting up groups where you have champions or departmental representatives on it, and you start off with people at a senior level who can make decisions and commit resources, and then over time it tails off. So we wanted to try to use the existing structures which have senior officials from across departments on them. Now, the other side of that is we also need structures which have people in place who know what needs to be done. So, and that is representatives from BME, the BME communities. We need to get the balance there right, and we're looking at this. But what we would see as what I suppose the two sides are one, we need the panel or a panel that is representative and can bring forward proposals and make sure that they're scrutinising what it is government does. And the other side of that is we then need senior officials to be sitting around the table and to sign up to the action plans, the specific actions, and that needs to be followed up on. And then I think that does need to be scrutinised.
What is the current cross-departmental action plan process in place for building united community look like at the moment?
Well, it looks like there's two elements: the ministerial panel and the programme board. The ministerial panel has met how many times now? Twice now. The programme board meets on
twice since when?
Since the launch of TBUC.
In May 2013.
And then the programme board.
Sorry, just to be clear, so the ministerial panel has met twice since May 2013. Is that right?
They're Building United Communities launched in May 2013. That's right. Now.
Okay.
The Delivering Social Change Programme Board. Well, I can come to that in a minute. But the programme board for TBUC then has senior officials from across all departments, and it meets on a monthly basis. Bi-monthly basis. And then in terms of DSC. We have there's basically a subgroup, a ministerial subgroup, and it meets on a quarterly basis, and it has been meeting on a quarterly basis throughout.
Ministerial subgroup for racial equality?
Delivering social change, I would say. And then there's a programme board which is chaired by junior ministers and which has officials on it from across all departments, and again it meets on a monthly basis.
And do you see the actioning of the racial equality strategy and the monitoring of it fitting into those structures?
That's why, because what being honest, what we would find is you'd start with senior officials coming from all the departments, and then after 6 months, there was a whole different set of people would come along because there'd be new panels set up or new structures set up for new initiatives. So what we've tried to do is to keep a standing group of officials at deputy secretary level there who can have the clout basically to make sure that their department does what it needs to do to support whichever strategy we're looking at.
And to add to that, Chair, we've had some useful meetings of the Good Relations Programme Board specifically to look at the issue of race hate and just to utilise that cross-departmental structure that's in place already to identify ways that departments can work together more effectively to address that. That's met twice with a further meeting planned for April as well.
Okay, and where do you anticipate responsibility for the racial equality strategy to lie further to the restructuring of the government departments?
Well, it's under current decisions, it would the racial equality policy would move to the Department of Communities.
Okay, and how would preparation for that transfer of function affect the timescale for production of the racial equality strategy, if at all?
We're working on the basis that it will not affect it, that it will have to be done because it will have to be done this year anyway. But in terms of, obviously, you know, it's a question that's coming up across the board, and it's coming across all departments at the minute that are where functions are moving or changing. There's a lot of this discussion. The view very consistently across the system is we need to deliver. We can't just put things on hold while we're.
How does the fact that the consultation response said that it needed to be a cross-departmental strategy fit with it going to one particular department rather than the executive office?
Well, there are already a lot of examples of cross-departmental strategies being managed from different departments. So you've got the Ministerial Group for Public Health and taking forward the public health strategy. You've got certainly in DOE there was the Climate Change Group, which had officials from across departments. You know, there's various different cross-departmental functions that are taken forward by other departments, and in fact, in a sense, that's something that depends on it on an issue by issue basis. It depends what's most appropriate, but there should be absolutely no reason why only one department should do cross-department. The whole department should be working on a cross-departmental basis. That's a message that's coming up through every consultation we do, in a sense.
Okay, I'd like to bring members in, and Alec Maskey.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation, and appreciate the can't be as candid as you might want to be, given the issues you're dealing with, and you can't speak for the ministers, of course. But there's a couple of things. I mean, obviously we're covering maybe the change in terms of the structure around here, and obviously, as you know, that the OFM, DFM don't have authority per se. A lot of people think they do, but they don't. They can't tell departments what to do and all the rest of that, even currently. So I would be a bit concerned if it's further kind of dispersed, policies are more dispersed in the department, then it is more essential that we get whatever we're going to do mainstreamed so as it is done, and it doesn't rely on somebody at first or deputy first minister level, because that, in my opinion, would nearly be lost and not careful. Where I'll be anxious about would be going out again in April, I think you said earlier on, to consult with the sector. What would you be going out to consult with them on? Because if I was the sector and somebody rang me and said, "Me, come and meet you in April," I'd be telling you to take a walk, because I've been consulted to and blue in the face with all due respect on this. And I'm saying this to yourselves, you're not the people that carry the con here. Really a political steer that's required here. So when would you expect or hope to get a political steer from the First and Deputy First Ministers before you get back out of the sector? Because I would strongly, well, if it was me, I wouldn't want to be talked to again in April, because bear in mind this is end of March, well into March. So unless somebody was coming to me to tell me, "I've taken on board what you've said, and here's what we're going to do," I wouldn't want to see anybody. I just want to get on with my work. You know what I mean? But and I've been genuine about that, because it's actually it's quite frustrating, you know, because you'll be saying to people, "Well, actually, you know, we're with you last year, around about the same time," and I fail to see what additional information you would get talking to the same people.
I think what came out when we met, certainly that common platform group before Christmas, and now obviously it's a wider group we're going to meet, was they had put forward a lot of issues within their response, and there were things that we wanted to explore a bit further with them. So this is very much, we've been careful not to say this is another consultation. We're going to meet the groups on a much wider basis to explore some of the issues they've raised through the response. So that response will be very much the basis of the discussion, with, as I mentioned earlier, a focus on implementation. They've put forward some ideas, for example, in relation to how a racial equality strategy may be implemented, one of which, for example, is racial equality champions. And we'd just like to explore those ideas. These are things that have been tried perhaps previously that may not have worked, but we'd be interested in hearing from the groups again, "Well, look, you've said this. Now, how might that work in practice?" Almost like a co-design process. You know, what might that mean in practice? How might that work where it hasn't worked before? So we've been very careful not to say it's another consultation. We're going back as follow-up to the response that was put in specifically by the Common Platform.
Just to add to that, just to say that was a very clear message came people wanted to be involved, not just so I totally accept if we were coming back out and saying, can you tell us again what you told us before? I think there would be a quite understandable frustration. I think it was more a case of us listening and saying, look, people didn't feel as if they'd had enough involvement. They felt that yes, they'd had the opportunity to be consulted, but they wanted really to get into the design of it and what it'll look like, and I think that was the piece. So we're trying to do, Lindsay said.
But, no, I mean, I appreciate that, and for me, the concern I would have is that, see, you could identify champions in every department tomorrow.
Yeah.
Somebody decides to go and do it, and probably are still some in existence. But that misses the big picture points, and all the organisations and all the consultees have told you what the big ticket items actually are. So I'm just making the point, and I would urge, and I would hope the committee would give support to this view, that I would want us to be urging the First and Deputy First Ministers to be setting yourselves out with a very clear understanding of what they're going to do about the big issues, what they're going to do about setting the law, what they're going to do about improving the law, setting the high standards, because all the rest was all bells and whistles.
Yeah, that's helpful.
So, I mean, I would want that, Chair, just, I mean, recorded, whoever would do that, and certainly after we have the presentations, I'd be making a point that I would like the OFM, DFM to be setting a very clear pathway here in terms of reaching these high international standards, which people have very rightly in all these consultations argued for.
Yeah, I certainly wholeheartedly agree with you, Alec. I think it's been quite some time since the ministers have been at the committee, which is why earlier I proposed that they attend in relation to some of the other issues that we've mentioned. Maybe we're actually working towards a couple of issues to raise with ministers, but there are clearly some big issues there, so I'd wholeheartedly support this committee seeking progress on them. Can I bring in Alex Atwood, please?
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Patrick, you said earlier that, quote, racial inequality is worse now than 10 years ago, unquote. And I think that whilst some of us wouldn't have all the facts and figures, we'd all have an intuition that, or a judgment that that's certainly the case, that racial inequality is worse now than 10 years ago. And I think that actually sets the standard against which we should judge ourselves, and you should judge yourselves, and the ministers should judge themselves. I said at the earlier session that I had a sense in the evidence that was being given by the 5 representatives of the sector that it was a bit like September, October 2013, when the committee was advised that the then Victims Commissioner had advised FM, DFM, formally alerted the language that she used about her concerns about where another significant policy area was lacking. And I think we are probably in the same space again, that we are, if not the language, we are being formally alerted by the sector about the deficits, put it at its mildest, in what is coming forward. It affirms me in my view, and this is not a comment on the 3 of you, because I know 1 or 2 of you a bit better than others, and I know that you work hard and so on, but in my own view, that until we bring into the life of government the specialists in each sector, be it racial equality, or childcare, or victims and survivors, and this is true about departments, not just FM and DFM, until we bring in those specialists, we will continue to fail the public policy challenges and tests, because government doesn't have sufficient range and capacity that the sectors do, and that we need to have those sectors in the life of government. Otherwise, government, I think, in my view, will continue to be limited, if not inadequate, in how it responds. That's what the Scottish Government does. For what it is worth, inadequate though it was, I tried to do it in DOE and DSD when I was there. You'll know a bit about that, Dennis. And I think we're in that space again, because the truth of the matter is that we're not going to have any new racial equality law in the lifetime of this department, of this government. And then it'll go to another department, and then we'll see what happens when it goes to another department. And I do think that that should be the perspective taken by OFM, DFM, and by yourselves now. In that regard, I would share in the comments made by Alex Maskey. but it still does require certain questions to be asked of you. So, a draft equality strategy went out that was based upon facts and figures from 2001 and didn't reference the last census, which leads now to a requirement that academics are doing a piece of work that's in final draft in terms of the evidence base around the strategy. Like, how did that come to pass?
Well, I think it's probably important to say that the strategy was not simply based on 2001. I think Ken had clarified that earlier, that this was not simply based... Well, first of all, I suppose it's worth saying it's not a strategy.
Census?
It referenced the census, and it was talking about...
upon the census figures.
Well, Ken, do you want to...
No, I mean, sort of, it doesn't specifically reference the census. It references research that was completed in 2014. So, I mean, sort of 3 years post-census. It was a consultation document. It wasn't intended to be a strategy. And people have misunderstood it, perhaps, as to what it was intended to do, but it wasn't going to do all these things that people thought that it was going to do.
It begs the question that it should have been a consultation about what was intended to do, rather than being something less than that.
It was intended to elicit people's views on these things, and as I say, I bookended the research with the Connolly research in 2002 and the Joseph Rowntree research in 2014.
But even though you've done all that, you're still now having to go out and get academics to update all the research, because presumably you accept that the evidence base in which you're working was limited, maybe not even adequate, to the point that you and I, in the 11th hour, having had a consultation, and before you go and speak to ministers, you had to go off and get academics to do more research in order to underpin what it is that you're proposing.
Well, I think there's a couple of points. I mean, I would definitely acknowledge, to come back to the first point, I think that when we're talking about evidence base, it's important to, for me, evidence isn't simply just numbers. It is numbers as well. But I think that your point, in a sense, we were acknowledging, because the fact that we're engaging with and going back to engage with stakeholders again recognises the fact, you know, this was not the strategy, as Ken says quite rightly, but we haven't got the response. You know, we haven't got a broad welcome of what we put out there. We might as well be open and honest about that. That's where we are. And so what we're doing is we are going to engage, not that we haven't been engaging, but engaging more intensively on actually developing the strategy. So I would accept that point. I think, is there a need for more research? In fairness, the actual document itself makes that loud and clear. And I think there's a need for both research, more research, and also the baseline monitoring to be much improved. So totally acknowledge that. But I think, in fairness, in terms of the document itself, it wasn't that we were ignoring anything that had happened since 2001. That wasn't the case. So
just worried that the consultation was a suck it and see exercise rather than something that was more meaningful and material. Could I ask you a second question? There was evidence given within the last hour about the life expectancy of ethnic minorities, and in terms of infant mortality being higher, and that, quote, the provision of health care is not equal, unquote. Now, given what you said earlier, given that evidence, which is critical, acute, worrying, given what you said earlier about you're responsible for a quality strategy, but other ministers responsible for delivery of actions, how do you think, where we sit now, that issue is going to be addressed in terms of ministers in the next few weeks around infant mortality and life expectancy and health care not being equal? How is that going to get addressed between now and then in a way that actually translates across into the life of the Department of Health and into the lives of people from an ethnic minority background?
Well, I think one of the things we're going to need to do is look at all of the possible levers. And I suppose one of the, if I was going to acknowledge one of the issues, I suppose one of the factors which has led us to this point, we've spent a lot of time focusing on funding and putting together funding programs and putting funding out. And that's incredibly important, and that's one key lever. But I suppose the danger with that is that lever of itself, funding programs for ethnic minority funding programs are not of themselves going to deal with the issues we're talking about. That's
Can I
where
ask
the
a brief supplementary dance, if you don't mind, Alex? What's the current budget for the Minority Ethnic Development Fund?
It's £1.1 million plus crisis funding over and above that.
Per year?
Per annum, yeah.
And that's real, and it's making a difference, but it's not going to sort out the fundamental issues of itself that need to be addressed. And that's where the legislation comes in as one lever. That's where the potential to impact on wider mainstream programmes. That's one of the advantages of the Department of Communities. It's going to be a very big department with a lot of responsibilities within it. So there is scope there to ensure that, you know, a lot of the actions that department is taking forward are very directly linked with the racial equality strategy. But in addition to that, then, you know, a lot of it's going to come down to the scrutiny and the monitoring. And I think it's a fair point to say that there's been previous issues where the committee has been informed about and has raised the profile of particular concerns. And I think those are all the things that we think are going to make a difference. Baseline monitoring is going to be absolutely crucial. There's no doubt about it. Because at the minute, the problem is that a lot of administrative information is not. There are some good examples of where administrative information does capture ethnic minority background and so on, but that needs to be replicated right across government, and that in itself will have a huge impact.
So the question was, how are you going to, in the next short while, prevail upon OFM, DFM, and through them and with health, to deal with the issues that were identified here earlier in terms of life expectancy, infant mortality, and healthcare being unequal? Because I haven't heard an answer to that. Whereas this may be an unfair characterisation of the evidence given earlier, it seemed to me that the evidence given earlier was that there is a lot of good work going on within the groups and some councils, and that the government strategy is funding.
Yeah, well, I think what we need to do is we need to focus on what people have said to us is we need to focus on legislation, we need to focus on some of the other levers. That's what we need to do. We can certainly, when you're looking at something like life expectancy has a huge range of factors associated with it. Not simply, part of that is obviously health and social care, but it goes much beyond that. You know, there are a whole range of different determinants that affect that. So a lot of the funding that we've been providing has been funding to try to add to, you know, it's not to replace mainstream provision, but it's to try to make sure mainstream provision is accessible. That has been our main, one of our main strategies, our main approach to try to tackle these issues. But clearly we need to go beyond that.
I think the point behind all this is that if there's not hard outcomes, there's very little. And the evidence was, quote, when it came to education, low-level belonging and high-level exclusion, unquote. When it came to employment barriers are the biggest obstacle to integration, unquote. And you've heard what the evidence is in respect of health. Any strategy that's worth anything, of any value, will have to respond to those three assertions on education, employment, and health. And at the moment, I don't hear that. I don't hear any sense that they're being identified as being the hard outcomes, and that there's going to be a strategy to develop that through FM, DFM, and in a proper relationship with the other government departments is actually going to tackle it.
Certainly throughout the ongoing development of the strategy, we will be developing outcomes, and we're starting that work already in line with the shared aims and what has come out of the consultation. And I think that will enable us then to go to departments and work with them to develop those sort of shared outcomes that will help us achieve change against the areas that you mentioned.
I'll conclude here, Chair. The opening comments said evidence was flawed, key inequalities not addressed, lack of action, issues of governance, and questions of resources, unquote. Those are the 5 tests of what you're doing.
Well, I think I think it is important to say, I think it's a fair criticism to say that, that the work maybe to date has been more around activities and funding than outcomes. I think that's not unfair. I think it's also not unfair to say that about a whole range of different policy areas. And I think there's a general realisation growing across government that we just cannot keep trying to put together new projects, new funding programmes, and hope that those are going to deal with our most intractable problems, because they're not. I mean, that's clearly not going to happen. The other side of that, though, is if that's the route we're going down, then it's absolutely right that we need to work with stakeholders to make sure that we're measuring the right outcomes. But it also is absolutely clear that we will not be able to link that directly to inputs. That's just physically not possible, because we can measure inputs, we can measure activities, but to be able to then say, well, that's going to actually lead to a different outcome, as in a population measure, it just isn't possible, because what happens is there are so many things that you cannot control outside of that we need to be honest and say that. If we are going to be serious about tackling outcomes, we need to be honest and say, well, there's no point in us pretending that we can change an outcome by producing a certain amount of funding. So I think the best we will be able to do is to identify the outcomes that need to change, and I think it's a fair point. We haven't maybe done enough on that, and that's part of what will come out in the strategy. I think then, but the next step in that is, okay, how can we influence those outcomes? Not sit here and try to tell you that we can actually do it through the Minority Ethnic Development Fund or anything else. It's not going to be a single programme. I don't know if that's helpful.
To follow that up, Dennis, I suppose a follow-up is the department was told this in October. We're in mid-March. Why is it going to take to mid-April to meet with the Common Platform?
Well, we have met already with representatives of the Common Platform, and we're following that up with a larger session to get into the actual detailed design work. That's really where we are at the minute.
And we've also engaged separately with CRC in the interim as well around that.
Okay, and in terms of one of the key priorities, the update of race relations legislation, will there be updated race relations legislation delivered in this Assembly mandate?
It's unlikely it'll be in this Assembly mandate, I have to say, because the only way you could do that would be, at this stage, I would have thought, through accelerated passage, and that's, given the breadth of the legislation, it's unlikely that that's going to happen.
Okay, and you mentioned the Minority Ethnic Development Fund, £1 million a year, which is a drop in the ocean, but vital to the organisations who receive it. It's my understanding that call for applications has yet to go out for financial year 15-16, is that right?
Yeah, it's yet to go out. We expect to be making the call very shortly.
And we're going to be looking at arrangements to try to ensure continuity of funding.
Well, what does that mean? Given financial year is weeks away, how is that viable for organisations to provide continuity? I presume that has resulted in a number of organisations with protective notices and everything else that goes with that level of timescale that they're working with. Surely you're into the realms of considering year extensions at this point, given how late that call for applications seems to be going to go out.
We are looking at extensions, but not necessarily for a year, but yes, we are looking at extensions.
For what time frame?
Months, obviously subject
to cover until the people are informed as to whether their bid has been successful or otherwise.
How is that going to change the sustainability of an organisation? Surely, I mean, this sounds like a fairly disorganised process, similar to the processes that the victims and survivor service were subjected to, as Mr. Atwood has alluded to throughout the session today. So we're weeks away from the financial year. Organisations have had no call to applications, and you're only going to give an extension until a call to application goes out, at which point they could then be advised that they're not receiving it.
Until the decisions are made and grants are awarded, or grant awards are indicated. I hope that it will be within end of April, early May at longest, but we will sit down and see what we can do.
You think that's an adequately organised process?
It's not an adequately
for some of the
organised
only
process,
people
but we
who
only
live
heard about our budget very late on in the game, so we do what we can in the circumstances.
Okay, and are you in close consultation with the sector to keep them up to date in relation to developments?
We have informed the sector frequently, yes, and there have been a number of AQs helpfully, etc. So,
in relation to the baseline monitoring research you mentioned, is it possible to tell us who is conducting that research, what the terms of reference are for the research, and if it'd be possible to provide the committee with the research?
Yeah, we can approach ministers and ask if they're happy with that. It was Anne-Marie Gray and Goretti Horgan, I think, that did the research, but I'll provide you with the details.
Okay. Less members have any further questions. We'll bring that to a close. As I started, it's encouraging to some extent. I think that is extremely qualified now to some extent, that you do at least seem to have listened to and received the wide ranging of concerns that exist in relation to the strategy. I find it hard, and I sincerely do not mean this in a political way, but as a member of the committee, I find it hard to conclude further to today's session that racial equality is an urgent priority for the First and Deputy First Minister and the office. I think it's hard to conclude otherwise as a member of the committee charged with scrutinising work in that regard. So perhaps you can take that on board, and we'll be receiving more detailed update from you in the near future in terms of what the timescales are for progress on some of these issues. But given that the most important issue raised consistently by the consultation will not be addressed in the rest of this Assembly mandate, I think the department has its work cut out to reassure anybody that I'm wrong.
I just want to repeat the point I made earlier on there. That doesn't apply to Deputy First Minister, I can assure you that.
Okay, that's on record.
It might be worth just one point of clarification on the legislation. While it wouldn't be, without accelerated passage, it's difficult to see how the legislation would go through in this term. That doesn't mean to say that draft legislation can't be worked up and consulted on this time. So I think that would be important to clarify that.
Okay, that's helpful clarification. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for being here. So it's obviously an important issue, as other members have alluded to. You obviously have a commitment to the issue, and I wish you well in the work that you have scheduled in coming weeks and months. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, members should be glad to know that's the last agenda item for today. Do members have any other business? No? Okay, then date, time and location of our next meeting is Wednesday 25th of March at 2 p.m, room 30. Thank you.